Chapter 301, Chapter 299. 5 years ago, Woo Jinchul had already noticed the changes in the world. He didn't come in today either? No, sir. Jungbu Police Station, Violent Crimes Unit Office. Detective Sung Jinwoo's desk had been empty for days, but his colleagues didn't show any worry or concern. Because this wasn't unusual. Detective Sung Jinwoo was an elusive person and often disappeared like this. But despite that, he was untouchable, not even receiving a reprimand, let alone writing a single report. For a public official, this was an extremely exceptional case. But it was only natural. A secret backer? Was it because Chief Woo Jinchul was supporting him? No, it was simply because his performance was outstanding. Who would reprimand a violent crimes detective who was good at catching criminals? Especially when Detective Sung Jinwoo disappeared and returned, he always brought numerous felons with him. Most of them were those that other departments, or even other regional police stations, had practically given up on investigating. That day was always a day for the entire Violent Crimes Unit to have a dinner party. As if expecting him to show such centricity again, none of Sung Jinwoo's fellow detectives worried about him, even though his seat had been empty for days. They were too busy cleaning up after the criminals he caught to worry about the living legend of the Jungbu Police Station Violent Crimes Unit. Detective Sung Jinwoo was great, but the problem was that he only caught criminals and left all the troublesome paperwork to his subordinates. Of course, he shared the credit with his subordinates who did the paperwork, or even gave them the entire credit, so he was a truly unpredictable senior. There was a reason why there were rumors that he was doing this as a hobby. But despite that, there was one person worrying. For some reason, this time, Chief Woo Jinchul's expression was a bit dark as he looked at Detective Sung Jinwoo's empty seat. It's taking him a particularly long this time. Woo Jinchul knew that catching criminals was just an excuse for Sung Jinwoo to disappear for days. Actually, he would have been struggling alone in a place no one knew to protect the world, and he only caught a few hidden criminals on his way back because he couldn't return empty-handed. But in recent years, the number of times Sung Jinwoo disappeared has been increasing. Of course, each time, it wasn't for long, but he had a feeling that this time his leave would be longer. Huff! Woo Jinchul looked out the office window and up at the sky, and he spoke as if sighing, "Let's mark it as vacation this time." "Yes, but Detective Sung didn't apply for vacation. I'll authorize it myself." "Yes, sir." Was there any other option? When the police chief himself said he would take care of it. Thud. The door closed, and Woo Jinchul sat alone and sighed deeply. And he thought of Sung Jinwoo, who would be fighting something that threatened humanity's survival somewhere in the world, even at this moment. And he firmly believed that he would eventually return, as always, smiling as if nothing happened, just like he always did. But why? It feels different this time. Even though he knew Sung Jinwoo's power, Woo Jinchul felt a strange anxiety this time. Why were ominous premonitions always right? Not days, but months. Not months, but a year, 2 years. No matter how much time passed, Sung Jinwoo didn't return. I should prepare myself. Woo Jinchul's eyes hardened as he looked at his empty seat covered in dust. Of course, even at this moment, he wasn't worried about Sung Jinwoo's safety. At least for Woo Jinchul, Sung Jinwoo was a god, no, an even greater existence. He couldn't even imagine the possibility of Sung Jinwoo being in danger. Rather, he focused on how formidable the enemies who were keeping him for so long were. And as time passed, about 2 years ago, Woo Jinchul's premonition finally came true. The cataclysm bang. When the news that the first gate was discovered in Seoul came, Woo Jinchul took action without hesitation. The moment of the cataclysm when Earth connected with other dimensions. While the leaders of countries around the world were in chaos, Woo Jinchul didn't panic. At least for him, this wasn't the first time, was it? First, awakening. The process wasn't difficult since he had already experienced it once. The alien energy flowing from the gate into the atmosphere, he skillfully grasped that mana. Flash! He immediately awakened as an A-rank hunter, just like before. The total amount of magic power is the same as before. Is this my limit? Woo Jinchul, after gauging his own magic power, immediately assessed the situation. He didn't even entertain the vain hope of awakening as an S-rank this time. Since he was a thoroughly rational person, He only thought about and planned how to utilize this situation. So they awaken the same as in the previous world, depending on their magic power aptitude. This is rather good. It reduces errors. He knew exactly what he could do and what he had to do. I need to create the association first. Woo Jinchul immediately put his plan into action. In the previous world, the association was organized when Chairman Go Gunhee awakened as an S-rank hunter, but unfortunately, Chairman Go has already passed away. In the end, the only one who could fill Chairman Go Gunhee's role in the current world was Woo Jinchul himself. Moreover, he was already the one who became the association president in the previous world. It wasn't a difficult task since he had already done it once. However, if there was a problem, I am not Chairman Go Gunhee. Chairman Go Gunhee, the head of a large corporation, organized the association with his vast funds and power. But Woo Jinchul didn't have that. With just a police chief's authority, he couldn't even compare to those with real power. But I have the memories of the past. Woo Jinchul was living his second life thanks to Sung Jinwoo, and thanks to being much older than back then, he had enough experience and wisdom. Depending on how I use them, my memories are no different from knowing the future. Woo Jinchul was fundamentally a righteous person, but he wasn't a pushover. Knowing that personality well, Chairman Go Gunhee also assigned him to the Hunter Association Surveillance Department. And due to the nature of that department, they dealt with a lot of confidential information. Even if the future changed, the past remained the same. The corruption committed by those in power and the second and third generation cables decades ago is also the same. Woo Jinchul also remembered all the information he handled back then. But since it was corruption from decades ago, incidents that were thoroughly forgotten and covered up, he couldn't take any action as a police chief. But if I'm a hunter, it's a different story. The current situation was the era of the cataclysm, where lawlessness was rampant. This meant that it was a world where it was difficult to deal with criminals even if they broke the law. But conversely, it also meant that an era had arrived where criminals could be punished regardless of the law. In that sense, the first thing Woo Jinchul did was take out the corruption data of politicians he had collected over the past few years using his position as police chief. And he neatly organized them into files, appropriately linking them to the depravity that had been covered up decades ago. And he went straight to the prosecutor's office and influential politicians presenting those files. Thud. Minister, could you spare me a moment? What? Who are you? How dare you? This is... I've put the guards outside to sleep. No one will come, even if you scream. They couldn't help but be bewildered by Woo Jinchul's unannounced visit. Encountering famous people with power or money was quite difficult. Naturally, they didn't meet just anyone, nor did they waste their precious time on something that wasn't beneficial, especially since no one wanted to be involved with the police. Then if Woo Jinchul was the police chief, it was basic etiquette to contact them in advance and make an appointment through their secretary to meet an influential person. But that was before the cataclysm. Now was an era where force reigned supreme over power and money. Especially in the early days, when there weren't many awakened yet, the bodyguards of influential people were just ordinary people without any magic power. Although the term villain hadn't been properly established yet, what Woo Jinchul did wasn't much different from the villains he arrested later. Woo Jinchul, visiting the politicians without warning, pushed up his black sunglasses with a meaningful smile. He presented the old data he organized and put a collar on their necks. Minister, wouldn't it be quite troublesome if this information leaked to the press? What? How can a police chief commit such an outrageous act and not fear the consequences? And what effect would this outdated information, past the statute of limitations, have now? Yes, you're right. Everything you're saying is correct. But the smile that had been on Woo Jinchul's face disappeared. A memory suddenly came to mind. The history forgotten by everyone now. The time when he became the association president after Chairman Go Gunhee in the previous world. He was immediately summoned by the president and received a request, or rather a demand, to use Sung Jinwoo as a promotional ambassador for national prestige. First, a promotional ambassador, and then President Kim Myung-chul gradually tried to exploit Sung Jinwoo's name politically. Hehe, unlike with someone, I can reason with you, Association President Woo Jinchul. Yes, I would like you to put in some effort, Association President Woo. This isn't just for my benefit. Unlike with someone, it wasn't difficult to figure out who he was referring to. Woo Jinchul gritted his teeth silently and said, former Association President Go Gun-hee was a true gentleman. Yes, yes, he was too principled for a gentleman. I am very different from Association President Go Gun-hee. Hehe, that's right, the Hunter Association should change like that. How long should it be bound by old rules? Woo Jinchul was dumbfounded by the president's proposal, and he was angry that he was caught up in this mess as soon as he became the association president. They must be underestimating me. Because he wasn't former association president Go Gun-hee. Now that the one who had been acting as a breakwater for the association was gone, the political world immediately targeted him. They wanted him to work for them. But Woo Jinchul found himself feeling relieved as well as angry. Association President Go Gun-hee always said that the Hunter Association should create an environment where hunters could focus on their work as hunters. And that's not just for the good of hunters, but also for those who aren't hunters. Recalling those memories, Woo Jinchul slowly raised his magic power in front of the Minister of National Defense. Rumble. What are you? The minister couldn't help but be terrified as the building shook as if it would collapse from Woo Jinchul's magic power. The man he thought was just a police chief was suddenly emitting the aura of a giant predator. Minister. Woo Jinchul calmly spoke to the minister, whose face had turned white. The same words he said to President Kim a long time ago. How long do you think it would take me to kill everyone in this building, including your bodyguards, if I wanted to? The minister jumped to his feet, but his body froze from his killing intent. Woo Jinchul didn't overestimate his power. Just an A rank. With this meager power, he was nothing but a fly before those great monarchs or rulers. But at least, among fellow humans, the power of an A-rank hunter was a disaster. How could a human, helpless even against a tiger or bear, possibly handle an A-rank hunter? A few hours? No, it wouldn't even take a few minutes. Woo Jinchul calmly continued, looking at the minister who was turning pale from his killing intent. Then how many people would it take to stop me from rampaging? Well, perhaps if you mobilize all the police and soldiers in Seoul and endure until my magic power runs out, you might be able to stop me somehow. Woo Jinchul's calm expression as he spoke those terrible words further fueled the minister's fear. Just why? He wanted to say something, but his lips wouldn't move properly, suppressed by the killing intent. In that time, I could kill you, the minister, and then your family one by one. Of course, I'll only kill those who committed wrongdoings in the past, as recorded in this document. And as you said, I just have to run away until the statute of limitations expires. What do you want from me? The terrified minister finally succumbed to his threats. At that moment, Woo Jinchul's killing intent disappeared, and he adjusted his black sunglasses, grinning. Well, first, help me establish the association, and one more thing. Woo Jinchul took out a strange stone from his pocket. I'm trying to collect these. Would you mind helping me? What is that? It's called a rune stone, although no one knows about it yet. Thus, with the consent of various politicians, the Hunter Association was quickly established. And after that, Woo Jinchul kept his promise with them and spared the lives of those who committed corruption in the past, but only their lives. After everything was over, they were all imprisoned in the Jisun prison that Woo Jinchul created. Chapter 3-2, Chapter 300. Originally, it would have been absolutely impossible. To create an association that united all the hunters in a country, one had to go through considerably complicated political and economic processes. It wasn't something a mere police chief could handle. It was possible in the previous era only because Chairman Go Gun-hee himself was the head of a large corporation. But was it because he pursued a too moderate approach? It took too long for the association to be established, and in the meantime, countless meaningless sacrifices occurred due to uncontrolled villains. Woo Jinchul, who remembered all that, decided to use a more radical and aggressive approach this time. This wasn't simply because of the problems mentioned earlier. He was someone who had already experienced the world on the verge of destruction, someone who clearly remembered all those disasters that were absolutely beyond human control. He wasn't in a position to be picky about methods. This is a world without Hunter Sung Jinwoo. Can I fill his shoes? Just that fact alone showed how heavy the burden of responsibility Woo Jinchul carried was. After the cataclysm, he couldn't sleep a single day without pills. How could he close his eyes peacefully and lie in bed when he felt like the monarchs would tear through the sky at any moment? Filling his shoes was impossible from the beginning. Then what can I do? Woo Jinchul desperately tried to remember what Sung Jinwoo wanted, what the world should be like when Sung Jinwoo, who was away, returned. And then he found the answer. Not to hold him back when he returns. That's the best I can do. At the very least, I shouldn't become a hindrance to him. To do that, he first needed the power to completely control the hunters. It had to be a hunter association with greater control than the hunter association led by S-rank hunter Go Gunhee. But he was only A rank. It was impossible to make the S-rank hunters who would appear in the future obey the hunter association's orders through ordinary means. So I'll force it, by any means necessary. Bang. Whoo! Bang! Woo Jinchul? Just like that, day after day, the leaders of Korea's political and economic worlds received sudden visits from Woo Jinchul. Even in the midst of that, Woo Jinchul was fair and unbiased. He visited all political parties equally. Anyhow, every political party had a similar ratio of corrupt figures, so as long as he kept the order, he could maintain the balance. It also minimized the chaos in the political situation. Bang! The door suddenly shattered. Hello, my name is Woo Jinchul. Bang! Hello, I'm Woo Jinchul. The moment the man with black sunglasses barged into their office. Hello, you know me, right? All the politicians who saw Woo Jinchul had the same expression. The time has finally come, and closed their eyes tightly. Rumors about Woo Jinchul had already spread widely through the network of those who committed corruption together. But what could they do, even if they heard the gossip? What could they do? You recently tripled your personal bodyguards? I see you've heard the rumors about me. I'm curious who you heard it from. Who is it? Gulp. There was nothing they could do. They could only turn pale and swallow dryly. No matter how many bodyguards they hired, they couldn't stop Woo Jinchul's visit. They were helpless even after spending a fortune to hire awakened bodyguards. It was only natural. The world didn't have hunter ranks yet, and even if they hired a large number of awakened as guards, those guards didn't even know if they were C rank or B rank. Even if there were dozens or even hundreds of those, they couldn't be a match for Woo Jinchul. Moreover, even if there happened to be another A-rank awakened among those guards, it wouldn't change anything. A newly awakened A-rank? It was a great insult to compare an inexperienced A-rank who didn't even know how to use their power to Woo Jinchul. First of all, Woo Jinchul was the section chief of the surveillance department of the Hunter Association who dealt with countless hunters in the previous era. Whoosh! Thud! Kyuk! Woo Jinchul suddenly grabbed the bodyguard who appeared behind him without a sound by the collar with one hand and threw him to the ground. He opened one eye in surprise. This one is quite something. Where did you recruit such a useful assassin type awakened? How? The assassin type awakened, who tried to ambush him from behind, couldn't help but panic. Woo Jinchul's sharp eyes, beyond the black sunglasses, saw through his stealth skill. But he calmly replied to the assassin-type awakened, who was looking up at him with a dumbfounded expression. Don't be too disappointed. I recently learned a new danger perception skill, so I won't be caught off guard so easily. But Minister, is this all you prepared? I'll cooperate with the association. That's a wise decision? Was it that hard to just say that? It would have been easier for everyone if you had just answered when I asked over the phone. I apologize. Well, I understand. If you became the association president yourself, it would be quite convenient to use that overwhelming force politically, wouldn't it? It's certainly tempting. But as I've always said, I have no intention of getting involved in politics. Woo Jinchul firmly emphasized his belief as he threatened the politicians one by one. Hunters in the hunters' realm, politicians in their own realm. To make the world run properly, that was required. It was the belief of the Hunter Association, no, of Chairman Go Gunhee. All I want is one thing, to allow all hunters to focus solely on their duties as hunters. Hunter. The one who quietly muttered the name Hunter that came out of Wu Jinchul's mouth was none other than the assassin-type awakened who failed to ambush him. Wu Jinchul glanced down at him with a strange smile. In that sense, I'll take this awakened with me. His skills are wasted as just a bodyguard for a politician. For your information, this isn't a request. Do as you please. The politician, left alone in his office, sighed deeply as he watched Wu Jinchul disappear, dragging the assassin-type awakened with him. The rumors were true. If there were any useful awakened among the bodyguards of the politicians Wu Jinchul visited, he would kidnap them for the association. It was absurd that such a lawless person would create an association to eliminate villains. Just like that, the Hunter Association was smoothly established with the histrionic agreement of both the ruling and opposition parties. And Wu Jinchul proudly became the first association president. The process was very unconventional and fast. Thanks to that, South Korea became famous as the country that recovered from the cataclysm crisis and stabilized its society the fastest in the world. So much so that other countries visited the Korean Association non-stop to learn about the system and hunter laws they created. Wu Jinchul's association was able to systematically capture villains who were drunk on magic power and rampaging, and even created a special detention center for them. Moreover, as the association's control became stronger than in the previous era, it could prevent unnecessary battles caused by conflicts between hunter guilds. And on top of that, since they could immediately respond to gates as soon as they appeared, it allowed the citizens to safely return to their daily lives. In the process, Wu Jinchul gained tremendous support from the citizens, but conversely, there were also many who became hostile towards him. Since the process of creating the association was unconventional, there were quite a few who held grudges against him, especially those who knew that Wu Jinchul had all their corruption data in his hands, spent a lot of money to secretly assassinate him. But none of those attempts worked on Wu Jinchul. Bang! Hello, Mayor. How? Ah, dear, you seem surprised. I recently acquired a skill that makes me immune to stamp poisons. Arrest him. Thud, thud. The politician who attempted to assassinate Wu Jinchul was arrested and dragged away by the hunters at the association president's command. The world was still lawless, as the association had just been established, so assassination attempts like this were common, but surprisingly, none of them worked on Wu Jinchul. Just how many skills does that guy Wu Jinchul have? It was maddening for those who were hostile towards Wu Jinchul. There was no way to deal with him. There were even rumors that Wu Jinchul had over 100 skills. And surprisingly, those rumors were becoming closer to the truth. In real time, no one knew the reason or the method yet. The establishment of the association was simply incredibly fast, and the world was still in the early days of the cataclysm. People didn't know about runestones yet. In the first place, the number of runestones released into the world was extremely small. And even if someone luckily obtained a runestone, they didn't even know that they had to break it with their hand to learn a new skill. Those who instinctively sensed that it was a precious item didn't break it, but kept it safe without a scratch, because they didn't know how to use it in the first place. The only cases were when someone accidentally broke a runestone inside a magical beast with their weapon while hunting and learned a new skill. But these good times will soon be over. People weren't stupid. It was just a matter of time. All hunters would soon learn about runestones. So Wu Jinchul took advantage of this brief period of chaos and gathered as many runestones as possible to get ahead of everyone else. The more he did that, the more skills he could use. But even then, he was still an A-rank hunter, and Wu Jinchul knew his limits well. He wasn't a hunter who grew stronger through battles like Sung Jinwoo, but I have to become stronger than anyone else. To fill Sung Jinwoo's shoes, he had to become stronger somehow. At least strong enough to not lose to humans. So the method he came up with was monopolizing runestones. If I can't increase my magic power, I can just increase the type and number of skills, can't I? It was only natural that the more skills you could use, the stronger you were, even with the same A rank. That was why runestones were traded at astronomical prices among the hunters of the previous era. But while people in the world still didn't know the value of runestones, Wu Jinchul had already become the only A-rank hunter in the world who could use that many skills. Of course, only a handful of people within the association knew about this. Among them, Hunter Choi Jongin, who had been with him since the early days, knew Wu Jinchul's true power well, and the side effects that came with it. Crack. And now Suho was also witnessing that result. Just an A rank. The result of cramming too many skills into a vessel with a limited capacity. Wu Jinchul was currently dying, and this was a condition that couldn't be cured even by the best healer. This wasn't an injury, it was just the process of his vessel breaking. Chapter 303, Chapter 301, Rumble. Somewhere in outer space, far away from Earth, in the middle of the battlefield where the war against the outer gods was raging, a man in jet-black armor commanding the armies suddenly muttered while staring into the distance, "I wonder if the chief is all right." As the war against the Itarim continued, those he left behind on Earth occasionally came to mind, and among them, the one he was most concerned about was Chief Wu Jinchul. "Who are you worried about?" One of the rulers, commanding the angels beside him, asked. "Family or a friend?" "A comrade, the only colleague who shares the old memories with me." "A human with memories of the previous era. If that's the case, he must be playing a big role in this chaotic time, so why are you so worried?" "Because he might overwork himself." Sung Jinwoo couldn't help but smile bitterly at the ruler's question. He's that kind of person. How could he not be worried? As a comrade in the past and a colleague in this world, having spent so much time together, Sung Jinwoo, who knew Wu Jinchul's personality well, couldn't help but worry about him. Wu Jinchul. He was the human who knew the most about the truth of this world. It had already been decades since he regained his memories of the past. Moreover, even while working as a police officer with him, he knew that Sung Jinwoo was fighting off invaders from other dimensions whenever he was away. So he always approved his leave or half-day off with appropriate excuses. Wu Jinchul was a reliable boss as a workplace superior and a colleague whose friendship deepened even more as they spent 2 lives together. But sometimes knowing too much was also a poison. Wu Jinchul knew from a long time ago that Sung Jinwoo was still fighting off extraterrestrial invaders in this world as well. No, he knew that extraterrestrial invaders were still targeting Earth in this world as well. Even though a global cataclysm didn't happen like in the past thanks to Sung Jinwoo, he knew all too well that this peace could shatter at any moment and return to how it was back then. That fact caused great anxiety in Wu Jinchul's heart. It was literally PTSD. He was a veteran who vividly remembered the near end of the world, which was much worse and more terrible than any human war. But fortunately, Sung Jinwoo was always by Wu Jinchul's side. Because of that, whenever Wu Jinchul had small talks with him, he would jokingly say what he would do if such a world came again. Hunter Sung. "If such a world comes again, I'll do this." "No, maybe it would be better to do this." Since Chairman Go Gun-hee has already passed away to take his place. Of course, it was really a joke back then. Everyone had those kinds of what-if imaginations when chatting, but Sung Jinwoo already knew. Whenever he made those jokes and imaginations, Wu Jinchul's eyes were more serious than ever, and as proof of that, he had decided to stay a bachelor for the rest of his life. It wasn't that he declared celibate or anything, but no matter how old he got, he didn't seem to have any thoughts about marriage or children. When he asked him about it one day, Wu Jinchul's answer was this. "Hunter Sung, do you know? I'm actually an orphan. I don't know who my parents were. I don't have any children either. But living like this, it's been good in many ways. Do you know why? Well, why? No weaknesses. No family to become hostages. That's how I was able to become the section chief of the surveillance department in the previous era. I wasn't afraid of any repercussions, no matter how much resentment I incurred from villains." Wu Jinchul brought up old memories with an expression as if he had swallowed bitter medicine. It happened often. The families of colleagues or subordinates being targeted by villains in retaliation. the surveillance department of the Hunter Association. As he said, the hunters of the surveillance department who managed bad hunters were always exposed to danger. What can we do even if we're awakened? What can we do even if we're A-rank? If they secretly attack our homes and retaliate against our helpless families, that's it. Woo Jinchul clearly remembered the eyes of the villains caught and arrested by the surveillance department hunters. Those venomous eyes weren't just a simple warning to watch out at night. Villains. They were criminals, but before that, they were superhumans with tremendous power. Even ordinary criminals committing retaliatory crimes were terrifying, but if villains with superhuman powers took revenge, it was a true tragedy. Killing an entire family? The villains' revenge didn't stop there. There were cases of association hunters who suffered terrible retaliation beyond imagination. If the association was underestimated by the villains, truly terrible things would happen. So we couldn't help but hesitate, even if the villains just threatened us with words, especially those with wives and children. But those threats didn't work on me, because I didn't have a family to become a weakness. Is that why you're not starting a family this time as well? Because you're a police officer? Haha, I guess so. Somehow, I've become a violent crimes detective again. Although the degree might be different, it's still a job where repercussions are scary. Don't do that, Chief. This time, date and get married. If you have a family, Chief, I'll protect them without sparing any means, even if I have to use all my soldiers. Haha, those words alone are very reassuring. If the Shadow Army personally protects them, I really wouldn't have to worry about any repercussions. But, do you know? Woo Jinchul subtly looked around and whispered a hidden truth only Sung Jinwoo could hear. Actually, I'm just unpopular. Whenever I go on blind dates, they all say my eyes are too scary, chug their coffee, and quickly pack their things. Chief, when's your birthday? I'll buy you some luxury sunglasses. Haha, thank you. Countless small talks that started seriously but ended with a rather bitter conclusion. Looking back, Sung Jinwoo and Woo Jinchul's relationship was always like that. Colleagues who happily beat up criminals together and returned to the police station to share instant coffee, sharing trivial daily lives. Looking back, all those insignificant moments were memories. Especially when fighting nonstop in the vast outer space like this, those memories occasionally cleared his stuffy head. Anyway, Chief, I'm serious. If you have a family, I'll definitely protect them, even if I have to use all my troops, so please try to start a family this time. Woo Jinchul couldn't help but ponder for a long time at Sung Jinwoo's sincere words. All right, but since I'm receiving so much, what can I do for you? He couldn't help it. There was nothing he, a mere human, could do for Sung Jinwoo, who already had it all. Ah, then how about this? It shouldn't happen, but just in case, if you happen to be away for a long time, Hunter Sung, I'll protect your family. Huh? Are you sure? It's grounds for disciplinary action for a police chief to use his subordinates for such personal purposes. Are you really worried about disciplinary action? If such a day comes, the world would already be on the verge of destruction. Woo Jinchul truly shuddered at those words, having already experienced the world on the verge of destruction once. But as time passed, now that the world they jokingly talked about had become reality, Sung Jinwoo realized Woo Jinchul's sincerity once again. He seems to be overdoing it. Sung Jinwoo, who briefly peeked at the situation on Earth through illusion magic, learned about Woo Jinchul's actions over the past 2 years. And surprisingly, he was actually keeping all the promises he made. Creating the association, becoming the association president, and even creating an association with far greater power than the one established by Chairman Go Gun-hee, succeeding in stabilizing the chaos in South Korea at a rapid pace. But Sung Jinwoo couldn't help but smile, bitterly as he imagined how much hardship he must have gone through in the process. Chairman Go Gun-hee was the head of a large corporation, an S-rank hunter, and even a vessel of a ruler, possessing tremendous power. On the other hand, Sung Jinwoo could imagine what kind of path Woo Jinchul, who was just a police chief, had walked to fill that role. No, to do even better than that. He had already heard it countless times. Just in case. If I become the association president. If that day comes, no, it shouldn't come, but his numerous plans muttered like a lament towards him whenever the Violent Crimes Unit had a dinner party. Of course, every time, Sung Jinwoo knew it wouldn't happen, but he always answered his drunken ramblings seriously. It won't work. If you have too many skills, your vessel won't be able to handle it and will break. It's a bit different, but I've seen my father die that way once. I know. Even Chairman Go Gun-hee was chosen as a ruler's vessel, but his body was too old to handle that power. Even so, if such a day really comes, I will do my best, because I don't want to experience that despair again. Sung Jinwoo couldn't say anything as he listened to Woo Jinchul's repeated drunken ramblings, and he realized once again, sometimes knowledge was poison, forgetting was a blessing given to humans, and remembering the experience of absolute despair and the end of the world meant dragging out the terrible trauma that had been deeply buried. You'll forget if you just sleep well. Take him home. Yes, Master. Hunter Sung, don't erase my memories again like last time. It's an order as your superior. Yes, actually, Sung Jinwoo tried to erase Woo Jinchul's memories several times for his sake, but it was no use. Having already formed a deep connection with Sung Jinwoo, the flashbacks of the previous era were no longer mere fragments of memories. Because the events involving the king who ruled death, the great shadow monarch Sung Jinwoo, were engraved deep within his soul, beyond his human body. Sung Jinwoo, feeling concerned as he thought of Woo Jinchul, turned his gaze back to the fierce battlefield and muttered, "Well, he'll be fine for now. I took some measures just in case." Flash. Javier's soulstone is activated. Huh? At that moment, Suho's inventory, who was before Woo Jinchul, opened on its own, and one of the items Sung Jinwoo prepared popped out, and it seeped into Woo Jinchul's body, which had cracks forming from the excessive skills acquired. Chapter 304, Chapter 302. Although he was currently on a leave of absence, Suho was an art student. The times when he pondered in front of a canvas with brushes and pencils in hand, the moments when he mixed paints to create colors, sculpted pottery, and contemplated the meaning of his works, all those times occasionally gave him a unique perspective. And in this moment, Suho suddenly recalled the Japanese pottery repair technique he presented in class. Kintsugi, nothing could be perfect. Breaking, shattering, cracking. That was life, art, and human existence. Kintsugi means golden joinery, a Japanese craft technique where shattered pottery pieces are joined with lacquer and then gold powder is applied along the cracks to repair them. What philosophical meaning does that technique hold? The professor's voice, echoing in the lecture hall, was vivid. Suho moved on to the next slide of his presentation. The kintsugi technique contains the meaning of embracing the scars and imperfections, not hiding them, and accepting even those as part of beauty, beyond the simple concept of repairing an object. It gives the lesson that we can embrace the wounds and flaws we experience in life and move forward through them. That's correct. You've prepared well for your presentation. The professor nodded with a faint smile. An art that doesn't restore something to its perfect new state, but rather makes it more beautiful by filling the broken parts with gold. It's just like our lives. And he continued his explanation. A vessel is bound to break someday. We too, in the storms of life, are sometimes hurt, cracked, broken, and even collapse. But is there anything perfect in the world? And in this moment, it was only natural for Suho to recall that day's memory, to finally love even that imperfection, to accept the scars accumulated in our souls as their own beauty. And those accumulated scars of life are the true history of our struggles. Golden joinery. It wasn't just a simple repair, but a sublimation through scars. Flash. Just as those words described, Woo Jinchul's entire body was enveloped in a golden barrier before Suho's eyes. Such high-level magic. The one most surprised by this was the shadow demonic spirit, Harmacon, Javier's soulstone. The magic circle of Sung Jinwoo contained within, that mystical golden light, was running through the cracks that were spreading throughout Woo Jinchul's body. Whoosh! It was like the roots of a tree, spreading its branches, like an intricately crafted spiderweb, like the hands of a craftsman repairing a broken ceramic. Sung Jinwoo's barrier began to meticulously stitch together Woo Jinchul's cracked vessel, the history of his struggles, with golden thread. Javier's soulstone begins skill reconstruction. Skills are being reconstructed into a new system. Just like a ceramic being reborn by the hands of a craftsman, Wu Jinchul's vessel was slowly changing. Those alterations were truly amazing. The numerous skills that had been excessively injected into him, on the verge of exploding, began to melt and merge into a new form one by one. Danger perception and poison resistance combined within Wu Jinchul and were reborn as survival instinct and strength enhancement and magic power focus were sublimated into the essential power of strength. The skills that were scattered as dozens of fragments gradually became one, like puzzle pieces fitting together. In a natural form, as if it was meant to be. Skill reconstruction complete. A new skill system has been established. The vessel damaged by skill overload is restored. It seems like this was Father's intention. Suho's voice quietly echoed in the silence that felt like time had stopped. Just how far did his father see that day? Not even his main body, but a fragment. Even with just that small fragment, Sung Suho's father, Sung Jinwoo, had made so many arrangements for those left behind on Earth. Without even using a single ounce of magic power, using just the soul of a demonic spirit as material. Whoosh! Finally, the golden barrier disappeared and Wu Jinchul's figure was revealed. "Are you all right?" Suho asked. Wu Jinchul slowly raised his hands and looked at them. White palms without any cracks. Instead, faint golden patterns were engraved deep within his skin, like blood vessels. It was as beautiful as the golden seams of a ceramic that had endured a long time. "My body feels light," Wu Jinchul muttered. The throbbing pain that had been following him since acquiring too many skills had disappeared. "It's like I have a new body." Wu Jinchul's words were filled with deep emotion. The chaotic flow of numerous skills colliding and trying to tear him apart was now naturally connected as one. Like musical instruments that had been playing discordant notes for a long time, finally harmonizing into a beautiful melody. And he could tell without anyone saying anything that this golden barrier was Sung Jinwoo's consideration for him. He might seem indifferent on the outside, but he knew the kindness within him, having spent so long together. So he dared to guess. Perhaps Sung Jinwoo already knew, even from that distant outer space. Just in case, if you happen to be away for a long time, Hunter Sung, that he was doing his best to keep the promise they made. "I'll protect your family," Hunter Sung. Creating the association, becoming the association president, the fundamental motive behind the path he had walked for the past few years. "Huh? Are you sure?" It's grounds for disciplinary action for a police chief to use his subordinates for such personal purposes. Chuckle. Wu Jinchul smiled as he recalled that day's conversation. Looking back, that was it. The reason why he consolidated his power as the association president in the first place. The reason why he desperately ran through his second life. At the root of it all was a very personal purpose, to protect Sung Jinwoo's family, as promised. To keep that drunken promise, he joined hands with CEO Yoo Jin-ho, among the many others, and deliberately sent Kim Chul, the most trustworthy hunter of the association, to Yangpyeong as the branch manager. "Don't let your guard down. It's just a temporary measure." Beru's voice suddenly broke through his thoughts and reached Wu Jinchul's ears. He, who had always been by Sung Jinwoo's side, knew the identity of this magic. This barrier is a magic circle that the king researched with many demonic spirits a long time ago. It's a countermeasure to forcibly hold together a vessel that's on the verge of breaking. The research originally started because he didn't ever want to feel the helplessness of just watching Sung Il-won die again. But the research that started like that was used in a completely different situation, with Cha Hae-in. And when Lady Cha Hae-in was pregnant with the young master, as the presence grew stronger in her womb, Lady Cha Hae-in's labor pains also worsened. It even reached the point where her vessel was in danger of breaking. "What? Me?" Suho's eyes widened at those words. He learned about his birth's secret in an unexpected situation. Yes, just by carrying the young master, an ordinary human, Lady Cha Hae-in's vessel was already exceeding its limits day by day. That's when this magic circle was first used. The purpose of the barrier was to restore a vessel that had reached its limit. The result was a great success. It was truly fortunate. The moment the magic circle enveloped Cha Hae-in, the labor pains disappeared and her vessel was safely restored. That's how Sung Suho was barely born. But the situation was different from back then. Back then, the king was right beside her, continuously injecting magic power into that barrier. But now it's different. Without that support, that barrier itself is just a temporary measure. Although the crisis has been overcome for now, if you overdo it, the vessel will start to crack again. A temporary measure. Although his tone was harsh, Beru was ultimately worried about Wu Jinchul. Don't raise your skills anymore. You could really die then. Thank you for the advice, Beru. It's not advice, it's a warning. Thank you for the warning as well. Wu Jinchul just smiled, understanding Beru's heart. And he looked at everyone around him, including Suho, and spoke, pushing up the black sunglasses in inlands. Sung Jinwoo gave him as a birthday present. Now that I'm healthy, shall we talk about work? Just like that, Suho sat face-to-face with Wu Jinchul for a long time, sharing the information they knew. And he handed over all the supplies he brought from South Korea. Wu Jinchul and his party, who were procuring supplies locally because they were running low, couldn't help but be surprised when a tremendous amount of provisions suddenly appeared before their eyes. Even Wu Jinchul, who was rarely surprised, was honestly bewildered this time. This was because the supplies included not only those sent by the Korean government and the association, but also the military supplies Yujino ripped out of the large guild's warehouses. Of course, the most useful weapons were already in the hands of Suho's shadow soldiers, but even the lower quality equipment was precious to Wu Jinchul and his party. Hunters' weapons were ultimately consumables. No matter how strong the sword or shield, if they repeatedly cut and broke the tough hides and hard bones of magical beasts, they would eventually be damaged and worn out. And there were no decent blacksmiths or forges in the apocalyptic North Korea. In the end, they had no choice but to wrestle with the magical beasts with their fists and feet. Thank you very much. Please tell CEO Yu Jinho that I'll repay him greatly later. Tell him yourself. What? Flash. Wu Jinchul couldn't help but be surprised once again, watching the gate created above Suho's shadow and seeing South Korea beyond it. Let's all take a break. Just like that, Suho sent the surprised Wu Jinchul and his party to Yangpyeong Hospital for treatment. If someone in South Korea saw that, there would have been a huge commotion, but thankfully, they all returned to North Korea early the next day without any fuss. And during that one night, Suho had already cut down all the nearby elven woods and sent them to the Sea of the Afterlife. Wu Jinchul, seeing that, nodded and decided on their schedule. Now that we've rested well, we'll take care of the remaining elven woods in North Korea. Hunter Sung Suho, you should head straight to Russia. There are many more trees there. And he handed Hassel over to Suho and said, take Hassel with you. She'll definitely be helpful, especially that scythe made of a star piece. A doctor from Russia gave it to her, and it will be helpful to meet him. Doctor? A scientist? Suho tilted his head in confusion. But Wu Jinchul didn't know his identity in detail either. We don't know exactly who he is. He introduced himself, but we weren't in a situation to tell if he was telling the truth. It was before we even knew about the cult of the outer gods. I understand. I'll have to go see him. And that moment came sooner than expected. The moment Suho crossed the Russian border, snow suddenly began to fall from the sky. But it wasn't snowing. It was a kind of cell falling. My liege, be on guard. With Beru's warning, those small cells gathered one by one and formed the shape of a woman before Suho and Hasul. White skin, pink hair. Her beauty was so faultless that it was almost eerie. The woman glanced at the scythe of harvest Hasul was holding and then greeted Suho in a cold but polite tone. I am the 47th doll of the doctor. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Sung Suho. Her attitude was very polite, as if she had been waiting for this meeting for a long time. Chapter 305, Chapter 303, Doctor. The mysterious being that Wu Jinchul mentioned approached Suho sooner than expected, as if he had been waiting for him to arrive in Russia. You said you're the 47th doll? As Suho's eyes narrowed, the pink-haired woman politely bowed and replied, Yes, I am the ultimate toy that the doctor perfected after 46 experiments. The doctor sent me as a gift to express his goodwill towards you, Mr. Sung Suho. Gift? What did that mean? Sensing Suho's rising suspicion, the woman tore off her own arm without a word. Crack. Whoosh. Before he could even be surprised by the sudden action, the woman's arm regenerated in an instant, pink cells wriggling. The woman, who showed that shocking performance with an indifferent expression, introduced herself once again. As you can see, I'm the best toy and slave that can be repaired, no matter how much I'm broken. It's a message from the doctor, asking you to play with me to your heart's content, Mr. Sung Suho. Whether for stress relief or combat, you can use me for any purpose. As Suho didn't answer, the woman tilted her head. Do you not like me? I was designed to have a fairly attractive appearance by human standards, but if there's anything you don't like, I can improve it. Suho frowned instead of answering, at her tone that sounded like someone explaining the functions of an electronic product. Wasn't this too suspicious? Not only did a guy he didn't even know suddenly offer him a gift, but that gift was the best toy slave? How many people would be genuinely grateful to receive such a present out of the blue? Suho felt nothing but disgust and discomfort at the sight of the artificial human-like being. He was truly curious. Did that guy called Doctor really think this would convey his goodwill? Didn't he know that this would only make him more wary? Or is there some other purpose despite that? Besides, Suho was more surprised by the woman's action of tearing off her arm without hesitation than by the fact that it reattached itself. That inhumanity of treating herself like a toy, wasn't it bizarre? Beru was also extremely wary. He glared at the woman and muttered beside Suho. The energy of Itarim is densely concentrated. Like, Beru's gaze shifted to the scythe of harvest in Hasul's hand. That scythe made of a star piece. The scythe of harvest, a weapon made by melting down star pieces. Wu Jinchul said he received that scythe from the doctor, and now he could feel almost the same energy from the unknown test subject made of condensed pink powder before his eyes. The meaning was clear. You said you're my gift? Yes. Please accept me. Before I decide whether to accept or not, I need to know who sent this gift. Suho asked the woman with a stern expression. Is the doctor who created you an apostle of Itarim? Yes. An immediate answer. Suho was speechless at the sight of the woman nodding obediently. He couldn't believe it was true. Why would an apostle of Itarim show me such favor? The doctor wants you to know that he has a different objective than other apostles. A different objective? Keek, my liege, don't be fooled by such lies. Of course, it's natural for you not to believe it. That's why the doctor offered me as a gift first. It's an expression of pure goodwill, that he has no intention of being hostile towards you, Mr. Sung Suho. The woman's shameless reply truly dumbfounded Beru. From his perspective, who had been fighting Itarim for a long time, he knew how absurd those words were. But Suho decided to try and get more information since the opponent initiated the conversation. Then what's the doctor's objective? As far as I know, the apostles of Itarim came to invade Earth. Of course, the doctor's purpose was the same as other apostles at first, but that was just him obeying the wish of Itarim, who created him, not his own will. He noticed something strange. He couldn't feel any respect or faith towards the outer gods in the woman's calm tone as she mentioned Itarim. It was as if an atheist was talking about religion. On the other hand, the woman showed absolute respect only when she talked about the doctor. In a way, it was only natural. If the doctor's creator was Itarim, the woman's creator was the doctor. The doctor has always been full of curiosity, so not long after arriving on this planet, while observing the natives, he began research instead of invasion. Pure curiosity? If he were to believe the suspicious woman's words, it meant this. He came to invade at first, but he's just watching because there are many interesting things here. It's more accurate to say research and analysis than watching, but it's similar in the end. So, why does the doctor want to get in my good graces? Does he want a native to guide him around Earth? No. Rather, The woman chose her words carefully, and she continued her explanation, choosing the most polite expressions. The doctor is very interested in this planet called Earth. Therefore, he no longer wants to be hostile with the Shadow Monarch, and he wishes to have a cooperative relationship with you, Mr. Sung Suho, the son of the Shadow Monarch, if possible. Cooperation? From Beru's perspective, he was seriously contemplating whether Suho should continue to listen to these ridiculous words. And as if knowing his thoughts, especially, the woman recalled the doctor's words. Isn't it interesting? Originally, all creations are made to carry out the Maker's will, but the creations of this universe killed their creator of their own volition. Would you like to try killing me too? I am your creator. Why can't you? You useless things. Don't you have free will? You can't do it either? Then I will try this first. Recently, the doctor has been conducting research to defy the creator's orders with his own will. Could this also be called research? Free will. Even the woman didn't know what the doctor truly wanted or what he was trying to do. But it didn't matter what he wanted. She wasn't curious. She simply followed the orders of the doctor, who created her. And there's a decisive reason why the doctor gave up on the invasion. Eek. Beru tilted his head as the woman's gaze suddenly turned to him, and Beru's expression hardened at the words that followed. Hardened, very, very much. After learning that you, Marshal Beru, the butcher of armies, have personally descended upon this planet, the doctor's mind was made up. I heard from the doctor that if you wanted to, Marshal Beru, you could slaughter all the apostles who arrived on this planet in an instant. Beru just scoffed with an arrogant and fearsome expression, his arms crossed at the continuous remarks. The words he had dismissed as nonsense were finally starting to make sense. But the reason why you're just calmly watching the situation unfold must be to train the Shadow Monarch's son and deploy him as a new force in the war. Not bad. Quite insightful for an apostle of nod. Could he do anything else? All Suho could do here was nod with a serious expression. Well, although there was a slight misunderstanding, it wasn't entirely wrong. Regardless of the minor details, it was true that she made a prediction quite close to the truth. In that sense, the doctor requests cooperation for a mutually beneficial cause. Cooperation? What does he want? The doctor wants to thoroughly research and analyze this planet. Naturally, that requires considerable time, but the problem is that other apostles are still damaging this world while the doctor is researching it. Wait, don't tell me. Yes, that's correct. As Suho's eyes widened, realizing the point of her words, the woman nodded. The doctor wants all the other apostles who interfere with his research to disappear. By your hand, Mr. Sung Suho. Even Beru couldn't help but be surprised this time. Of course he knew. The Itarim had temporarily allied with each other against the common enemy, Sung Jinwoo, but, in the end, they were in a relationship of monitoring and competing with each other. The winner takes all. They were invaders who crossed the distant dimensional wall to monopolize the vast amount of masterless mana remaining in this universe. Then what about the apostles under them? Those who served the same god would cooperate, although their methods might be different. But apostles who served completely different gods could openly impede each other like this, or engage in a secret power struggle, to the point of directly requesting murder. So he needs a proxy to fight for him, while he hides in a safe place himself. He seems like a very wicked and cowardly bastard. Beru pressured the woman with a displeased expression. If he's going to make such a request, he should come and prostrate himself. That's the etiquette on this planet. Please understand, the doctor hates leaving his lab. He's a coward. Rather, he believes it's more efficient to leave the task of gathering information outside to us and focus on his research. So he's a coward and a shut-in. Beru and Suho, who were mocking him in turn, were quite the comedic duo. As a result, the woman, who had maintained an expressionless face, finally showed some emotion. Ignoring her slightly twisted mouth, Suho pointed at Hustle's scythe and asked, "Then I'll ask while we're at it. Did your doctor make this scythe too?" "Yes, although it's a failed product. It was given to humans to keep the Apostle of Paradise in check." "And the Apostle of Paradise just watched?" "Yes. Apart from the power struggle between apostles, since they were on the same side with a common enemy on the surface, there was no justification for other apostles to stop the act of handing over star pieces to humans or contaminating them." "Am I contaminated?" Hustle looked at the scythe of harvest in her hand with a disgusted expression, but the fact that she didn't let go of the handle despite that was strange. And the woman, test subject number 47, who heard Hustle's words, stared into her eyes and spoke, "That's not contamination, it's called evolution, test subject number 13. Hustle's expression froze at those strange words. Chapter 306, Chapter 304, I'm a test subject? The scythe in Hassel's hand trembled slightly. She realized something strange. The woman who introduced herself as the 47th doll was clearly Caucasian, and it was difficult to find any resemblance to Hassel, who had a typical Asian appearance. But there was a strange similarity in their indifferent gaze, monotonous tone, and atmosphere, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, and Hassel vaguely felt it. The emotion that followed was doubt. Since when? Since when did she have this kind of personality? No, what kind of person was she originally? Everything was confusing, but unlike Hassel, who was confused, Suho was calm. Just what kind of misunderstanding is this? Suho suddenly reached out towards Hassel. Whoosh! Ah! The ruler's authority. The scythe of harvest in Hassel's hand automatically floated up and flew towards Suho's hand. Hassel hurriedly reached out, but her hand that was holding the scythe was weak, surprised by the word test subject. Whoosh! Grabbed Suho, who snatched the scythe of harvest with one hand, spun it, and gauged its energy. My liege, it's an unclean item. I'll take it. Beru, worried about any potential contamination, quickly took the scythe of harvest from Suho's hand. Beru had been feeling an unknown discomfort since he first saw this weapon in Hassel's hand. The fact that the scythe of harvest was made of a star piece wasn't enough to explain this strange feeling. Beru glared at the scythe of harvest and the woman with narrowed eyes. I never imagined it would be something like this. I agree. Suho also frowned and glared at the woman. That test subject number 13, you're talking about this scythe, right? Yes, that's correct. Hassel's eyes widened as the woman nodded obediently. Beru's entire body blazed with killing intent, and he puffed up one arm as if to grab the woman's head. How dare you try to insult us? I apologize. I had no such intention. I was just faithfully answering the question. The woman bowed her head with an elegant posture despite Beru's killing intent, and she pointed at the scythe of harvest that Beru was holding and explained again. That scythe, test subject number 13, is one of the countless masterpieces the doctor created, a weapon for extracting contamination. Extraction, not contamination? Yes, test subject number 13 was created to secretly steal the energy of the fruit that the Apostle of Paradise is collecting, so he handed it over to a suitable person among the humans wandering in his territory. Stealing the power of the fruit? Suho's eyes sparkled. The woman's words contained surprisingly important information. It meant that the apostles of Itarim weren't just checking each other, but also stealing each other's power. Yes, the person herself would have vaguely noticed, wouldn't she? The woman glanced at Hassel's entire body and asked, Didn't you find it strange? You've eaten the fruit of Elvenwood countless times, but unlike other villains, you're still not contaminated. Ah. Hassel's mouth opened slightly. Come to think of it, why didn't she realize it until now? Recently, when the harsh winter struck the villain's city, when Alfheim went on a rampage, all the villains living there had their bodies mutated, covered in hard bark as the power of the fruit accumulated in their bodies went out of control. In other words, they were contaminated. At this point, Suho also realized something. The information window that popped up when he first picked up the fruit clearly said it was a contaminated fruit. But looking back, Hassel was the villain who ate the most fruits. A reaper, no less. In North Korea, where there were no proper cures or healers, the only way to heal injuries and recover health was to eat the fruit. So Hassel must have consumed the fruit to survive. Even if Shell was an S-rank awakened, dangerous moments would always happen as long as she lived in a land swarming with villains. But Hassel, and only Hassel, was still fine. Even though she ate so many fruits, her skin didn't turn into bark or harden like the other villains. Don't tell me you're only realizing it now? Well, it's natural not to know. The doctor's purpose was to extract the power of the fruit as secretly as possible, to the point where even the Apostle of Paradise wouldn't notice. He could feel great pride in the doctor from the woman's words. In short, it meant this: the owner of the Scythe of Harvest won't be contaminated no matter how many fruits of Elvenwood they eat, because the scythe absorbs the power of the fruit that accumulates in the body instead. But they still experience the temporary regeneration effect, so no one notices. So this scythe is like a water purifier filter, only filtering out the impurities? The example is a bit strange, but the principle is similar. so could you please let go of my head? It's a bit scary. Beru's large, black hand was gripping the woman's head, with enough force to crush that small skull if he wanted to. But contrary to her words, the woman didn't seem scared at all. For test subject number 47, who called herself a toy, her own safety didn't matter. The woman continued calmly. Besides, if it weren't for that scythe, that girl would have been turned into the Apostle of Paradise's puppet long ago due to the accumulated contamination. The Apostle of Paradise is dead. Then what about now? Is she your puppet instead of his? No way. The function of extracting contamination and the function of contaminating conflict with each other. If those two conditions were applied to one test subject simultaneously, the Apostle of Paradise would have noticed. The doctor didn't want conflict with the Apostle of Paradise. He just wanted to extract his power for research purposes. Of course. The woman hesitated and continued. Since the human race is very easily influenced, it seems like she was slightly affected, but it doesn't seem to be a big problem. Easily influenced race? Yes, a race without a distinct personality. That's what the doctor said. Are there any side effects? If I had to pick one, perhaps her personality and aura became a bit similar to mine. There are no other side effects since test subject No. 13 doesn't have any other function besides extracting the energy of the fruit. Does the extracted energy go to the doctor? Yes, that's correct. That's good, Suho grinned, revealing his teeth. Then how about this? A delicious-looking fruit suddenly appeared in Suho's hand, and he asked the woman again, if Hustle eats this fruit now, will that energy also flow to the doctor? Yes. A faint anxiety sprouted in the woman's eyes, which had been expressionless, at Suho's meaningful smile. Beru. Yes, my liege. Eat this. The woman's eyes widened for the first time at Suho's words. Beru grinned at her blatant reaction, and after receiving the fruit from Suho, he opened his wicked mouth wide. Wait! Crunch! Before the woman could stop him, Beru unhesitatingly chewed and swallowed the fruit, still holding the scythe of harvest in his other hand. Munch! Munch! The situation changed completely the moment Beru ate the fruit instead of Hasul. He couldn't have known before. But for Beru, who had directly heard the principle of the scythe of harvest from the woman, it wasn't difficult to track the otherworldly energy from the fruit he ate flowing into the scythe, and also the direction where that extracted energy was headed after leaving the scythe. I found it. Grin, wait. She felt a chill as Suho and Beru exchanged smiles. Before the flustered woman could finish her sentence, Suho and Beru simultaneously turned their heads and asked, Is it that way? Judging from your expression, it seems like we're right. We have a lot of fruits, so let's follow it while eating. Yes. Swish. Wait, it was too late to stop them. Before the woman, who came to her senses a beat late, could stop them, they were already running far away, tracking the flow of energy towards the doctor. Eek! Thud! Tuh! Sense subject number 47, showing a clearer emotion than ever, began to chase after them desperately. This was bad. The plan had gone completely awry. Test subject number 47 chased after Suho and his party and desperately tried to persuade them, please stop now. Hey, he's a kind soul who even gave us a gift. We should at least thank him in person. The doctor hates interacting with others. But it's rude to just ignore him. Who said we're gonna fight? Let's just have a conversation. Suho wasn't the type to be persuaded. Please, I beg you, you can talk to him through me. Through you? Suho's gaze, who was running in a straight line with Beru, finally turned to test subject number 47. Are you saying your master is watching us through you? It's not surveillance, but a natural phenomenon between a creator and a creation. So you were sent to me for surveillance purposes. He's a shady bastard. Now we definitely have to find him. Things had gone wrong. From the moment the initial plan went awry, there was nothing number 47 could do to stop Suho. Even if he's the Shadow Monarch's son, he's still just a human. A young human male wouldn't refuse a beautiful female. 47. I choose you. You will be Sung Suho's from now on. The doctor's orders echoed in number 47's mind as she chased after Suho, who was running at an incredible speed. And eventually, somewhere in the freezing snowfields of Russia, bang! One of the walls of the Apostle of Evolution's lab, secretly hidden deep within the snowfield, was shattered, and unexpected intruders barged in. "Come out, you bastard!" And crunch. Beru, holding the scythe of harvest in one hand and chewing on a delicious fruit with the other, roared like the Grim Reaper himself. Chapter 37, Chapter 305. The building shook as if it was going to collapse at the thunderous roar of Beru. Soon answers came from all directions. External intrusion detected. Activating defense system. Zzz. Suho's head quickly turned to the side, and then a laser beam that flew from the side narrowly missed him. The failed attack beam pierced the wall behind him. Boom! He chuckled at the obviously fatal attack power. So the best defense is offense? Before Suho could even finish his words, countless laser beams began to fly towards him from all directions. Psst, psst, boom! Suho continued forward, dodging all the laser beams that formed a net-like pattern. My liege, there are tiny dimensional gaps all over the place. As Beru said, beyond the dimension, those laser beams were being fired through small dimensional cracks, barely big enough for a finger to fit through. In other words, there was no way to block the laser beams at their source. Just then, he heard test subject number 47's urgent voice. Mr. Sung Suho, please, I beg you, it's too dangerous to go any further. Who's in danger, me or the doctor? Me. Suho, who was smirking, turned around at those words and couldn't help but burst into laughter. Unlike Suho, who was dodging each laser beam, number 47's body was being repeatedly cut and reattached behind him. As if she had no intention of dodging the laser beams, her tattered appearance, with holes all over her, was absurd. Your regenerative abilities are amazing, so the guy who created someone like you is hiding here? Suho wanted to meet the doctor even more, but number 47's warning was sincere. The purpose of these laser beams wasn't to eliminate the intruder in the first place. Rumble. The ceiling suddenly began to collapse. It was a natural consequence. The laser beams Suho dodged, pierced and cut through all the walls and pillars supporting the building. It seems like he made the entire building collapse if the intruder wasn't stopped. Amazing. Did he prepare for this? He was a brutal but smart guy. The idea of burying his entire lab if the enemy's intrusion couldn't be prevented was interesting. But Suho had no intention of backing down. Rather, he calmly observed the surroundings as he deflected the falling debris with his fists. Then what did he prepare for next? From experience, smart guys always prepared for the next thing. So wouldn't he have prepared for what would happen after the lab collapsed? Found it. Suho's eyes sparkled. Although the laser beams seemed to be flying at random angles at first glance, there was something unique if you looked closely. The floor. What's the reason for cutting through all the walls and pillars, but never touching the floor? Suho raised his fist towards the floor, which was surprisingly well preserved, unlike the collapsing ceiling and walls. Using skill, iron body technique. Boom! Suho's fist, enveloped in terrific energy, struck down vertically, and with that momentum, it pierced through the lab floor. Crash! Intruder alert in the lab. Warning! Intruder alert in the lab. An alarm, seemingly more urgent than before, rang out from all directions. Earlier, it just said it detected an intrusion, but now it says there's an intruder in the lab. Then, as expected. Suho, who came down through the floor, looked around and soon found a classy staircase leading underground. Just as I expected, it seemed like the real lab was located deeper underground. Suho, slowly approaching the stairs, suddenly tilted his head. No matter how much he focused, he couldn't see beyond the stairs. It was like the entrance to an abyss. A gate? Suho grasped the structure at a glance. There's a gate at the bottom of the stairs. Or is it the other way around? Was the gate there first, and the stairs built on top of it? He looked at No 47 for an answer, but she shook her head. I don't know, because I wasn't born long ago. The lab has always been like this since I can remember. That sent be one of the reasons why he sent you as a gift. If she didn't know anything, there was no way to extract information from her. Anyway, what was certain was that the scale of the lab, hidden under the snowfield, was much larger than expected. If the Apostle of Paradise chose to expand his territory by planting trees that soared into the sky, the Apostle of Evolution was the opposite. To secure his safety and focus on research, it seemed like he built his base deep underground. Beru asked, "Shall we enter right away? It could be a trap." Although they arrived quickly before he could do anything, they didn't know what awaited them when dealing with someone smart. But what could they do? Let him do the thinking, and let us keep things simple. In the end, to meet the doctor, the only option was to enter his territory. Like a hunter, Suho's eyes gleamed meaningfully as he dodged the laser beams still targeting him. If there's a gate, we just raid it. Whoosh! Suho's foot stepped onto the stairs without hesitation. At that moment, the laser beams that were pouring down from all directions stopped as if by magic, and the scenery beyond the gate unfolded before Suho's eyes. Activating labyrinth system. Seriously, what a pain. What lay before his eyes was literally a labyrinth, countless walls and mazes blocking his vision, and numerous traps hidden along the complicated corridors blocked Suho's path. Starting with automatically moving saw blades, iron spikes shooting up from the floor, acid rain pouring from the ceiling, deadly traps were activated one after another, aiming for Suho's life. Oh dear. Suho just sighed. This isn't a playhouse. What the hell was he doing, hiding in here? The laser beams from before were much more threatening. Arise. At Suho's command, his shadow spread along the corridors and walls of the labyrinth, and countless shadow soldiers rose from within, accompanied by black steam. Breakthrough. Whoosh! That was all it took. The shadow soldiers destroyed all the traps hidden in the labyrinth and cleared Suho's path. Wait! No, 47 hurriedly blocked Suho's path. Besides the defense system, there are numerous test subjects in the doctor's lab. If you do this, the great achievements he created will be damaged. Grab, you're in the way. Beru's black hand lifted number 47's head, and he glared at the woman, hanging from his hand, and gritted his teeth. Guide us if you don't like this. All right, too late. Crash, we already broke through. As Beru said, Suho's path was already clear. Seeing the walls and traps turned into a desolate wasteland, number 47 let out a small sigh, and at the end of that path, there was someone waiting for Suho with a troubled expression. A boy. A young child who looked to be less than 10 years old sat on a chair, sighed at the sight of Suho, and spoke. I was planning to meet you someday, but you're much earlier than I expected, so I'm a bit flustered. Are you the doctor? Yes. For now, I'm using that title. You can also call me the Apostle of Evolution. Surprisingly, the Apostle of Evolution didn't seem disappointed at all that his hideout was destroyed. Creak. As the doctor got off the chair, his small figure became even more noticeable. It wasn't planned, but since you're here, would you like to see my lab? He moved his short legs and walked towards his lab, which Suho hadn't destroyed yet. Master, shall we kill him? First, I'll use my poison. The shadow soldiers by Suho's side glared at the Apostle of Evolution's back, waiting for the order to fall. But Suho stopped them for a moment. Besides, the doctor didn't seem to care whether they attacked him or not. I'm a bit embarrassed to show you this so suddenly. These are all my failed creations. If the path Suho passed through was a labyrinth full of traps, the place he was shown now was a space with the atmosphere of a scientist's lab. Countless glass tubes and fish tanks, pink cells wriggling inside them. And weapons? There are even various types of weapons floating, half-finished, emitting the same energy as Hassel's Scythe of Harvest. Ah, yes, those are all unfinished. I started making humanoid weapons from number 41, and number 47 I gave you is among them. Wait. Suho interrupted him and cut to the chase. Are you saying there are 39 more weapons like the Scythe of Harvest? Where are they? Suho's gaze quickly scanned the surroundings. He couldn't see any properly completed weapons here. The Apostle of Evolution replied awkwardly to Suho's question. Strictly speaking, they're all failed products, so it's embarrassing to even call them weapons. But it was a shame to just dispose of them, so I gave them as gifts to those I met along the way. Gifts? Yes, it hurts my pride to trade with failed products, so I just gave them away. Suho recalled what Wu Jinchul told him. He also said that he received the Scythe of Harvest from the doctor he met by chance. Just like that, without expecting anything in return. But there's no way there was no real purpose. To gauge his intentions, Suho pointed at number 47 and asked, Then is this woman also a failed product? Unfortunately, yes, she is. But she's a useful result, so it's a bit much to give her to just anyone. So you sent her to me? Yes, it's literally a gift with pure intentions, just so you know that I have no intention of being hostile towards the Shadow Monarch's son. Then I'll ask one more thing. Suho ignored his useless words and got to the point. Then who did you give the rest of the weapons besides the Scythe of Harvest to? Meanwhile, Wu Jinchul and his party, who parted with Suho, split into two groups, Choi Jong-in and Wu Jinchul. You must not burn the tree trunks. I'll keep that in mind. With that answer, Choi Jong-in went around North Korea to deal with the remaining Elvenwood. Whoosh! His fire skill was perfect against tree-type magical beasts. Of course, it couldn't compare to Sung Suho's flames of destruction, but it was enough against Elvenwood, which was already in chaos due to the Apostle of Paradise's death. Then I should also do what I can. The place Wu Jinchul visited was the city of villains, Alfheim, the Apostle of Paradise's favorite Elvenwood, and at the same time, the last hideout of the villains who ran away from Wu Jinchul. Arriving there, this is hell itself. Wu Jinchul muttered with a hollow laugh. He was told that winter had come to this land, but this was too much. As in all the places Sung Suho passed through, this land was also a mixture of hellish heat and harsh winter. In short, it was a complete mess. And in the middle of that, where Alfheim should have been at the center of the city, a giant ice pillar soared high, boasting its presence. We'll guard this place from now on. Yes, I'll set up camp nearby. Wu Jinchul left other miscellaneous tasks to Choi Jong-in, and he decided to protect what Sung Suho considered most important. But he wasn't planning to just stand here and do nothing. Although the Apostle of Paradise was dead, his traces would still be buried under this snow-covered field. Let's search everywhere, for traces of the bank. Wu Jinchul took off his black sunglasses, and his eyes gleamed like a hawk's. Chapter 308, Chapter 306. The area was blanketed in snow, stretching far beyond the horizon, but with so many hunters gathered here, it wasn't a problem. They could just melt it. Even the hunters following them, let alone Choi Jong-in, had fire skills. Rather, it was better if Choi Jong-in didn't step forward. If he used his firepower, he might not only melt the snow, but also burn away any meaningful traces buried beneath. Flare! 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 The association hunters began to melt the snow and meticulously investigate the ground, centered around Wu Jinchul, and the rest of them, without fire skills, started to build a base camp in a suitable location. Since they didn't know how long they would have to stay here, they decided to build a proper base instead of just setting up simple tents. Among that, they put the most effort into building a defensive formation around the ice pillar standing tall in the center. This is a sight I never thought I'd see. Wu Jinchul muttered with a strange expression as he looked at the thoroughly protected ice pillar. Circa. That ice pillar, where the ice elf who was Sung Suho's companion was trapped, was in an egg-like state, and they didn't know when it would hatch. And he also said that when that egg hatched, it would be the moment when Circa inherited the power of the Monarch of Frost and was reborn. To think that I would protect the descendant of the Monarch of Frost. The Monarch of Frost. To personally protect the descendant of the one who killed Chairman Go Gun-hee. Even if the enemy of an enemy was a friend, he couldn't help but feel mixed emotions when faced with this situation. Did I live too long? Wu Jinchul calmed his mind with a bewildered expression. No, time went backwards without me. First of all, after the world was completely reset, Chairman Go Gun-hee passed away after enjoying a long and healthy life, with the respect and condolences of countless people. He wondered if it was even meaningful to be angry at a young descendant over something that had become a non-existent event in this world. A temporary alliance to face a greater enemy. That's all it is for now. That was Wu Jinchul's stance towards Circa. And there was also the matter of power. Although he didn't fully understand how powerful the monarchs were, he knew that they were at least beyond human level. When Circa successfully became a monarch, she would be the one who could help Sung Jinwoo and Sung Suho the most. And at the same time, he knew all too well how powerless humans were in this war. A bitter expression briefly crossed Wu Jinchul's face as he thought that. Humans have no role in this war anyway. We're just hostages holding back Hunter Sung Suho. It was an extremely cold-hearted assessment, but what could he do? It was an obvious fact, and he had already experienced it once. Wu Jinchul was deeply aware of how powerless the human race was at the time of the apocalypse. So even if we just don't cause unnecessary trouble and panic among ourselves, that's good enough. Well, in war terms, it would be like civil defense. Wu Jinchul chuckled as he thought that. But it's still fortunate. It seems like his son took on the role of supporting him from behind. Suho, Sung Jinwoo's only son. After seeing his power with his own eyes, Wu Jinchul felt truly relieved for the first time in ages. The heavy burden that had been weighing on his shoulders disappeared like melting snow, especially that night when he passed through the gate. Suho opened and fell asleep on the soft bed in Ajin Hospital with an IV drip. He was finally able to have a good night's sleep. The insomnia that had been plaguing him, the dark circles under his eyes hidden by sunglasses, all disappeared overnight. That was why he couldn't help but let out a silly laugh. And he suddenly muttered in a casual tone, "Now that the real war has begun, I can withdraw from this association president post that doesn't suit me." What do you mean? All the hunters nearby, who were clearing snow, were shocked and doubted their ears. What did they just hear? Wu Jinchul was quitting as association president? Why all of a sudden? Considering the tremendous presence and influence of association president Wu Jinchul in Korea, they couldn't think of anyone who could replace him. But Wu Jinchul was serious. Preparing for war, that was always my role and goal. He smiled at the bewildered hunters with a truly relieved expression. His black sunglasses reflected the dazzling snowfield. And no matter how much I think about it, being the section chief of the surveillance department suits me best. The hunters couldn't hide their confusion. The surveillance department all of a sudden? What is the association president talking about? The surveillance department. It was the section that suppressed crimes committed by hunters and subdued criminals. In other words, it was optimized for battles against humans rather than dungeon raids. Armed with skills specialized for dealing with fellow people rather than magical beasts, that was the surveillance department. And once, in the vanished history that no one remembered now, Section Chief Wu Jinchul was the elite agent with the highest combat power against humans in that surveillance department. In short, this is what it means. Crack. Crack. Wu Jinchul relaxed his shoulders, which felt much lighter, and subtly held his weapon. I want to take off this cumbersome hat and return as a pure hunter. It was at that moment. The voices of hunters who were excavating traces of the bank buried in the snow could be heard simultaneously. Found it! We found a suspicious stone tablet. I can feel the magic power. No, it's getting stronger. Whoosh! Even before they could finish their words, the wave of that magic power reached all the hunters in the area. And Wu Jinchul, who was the first to detect that dangerous sensation, glared at that spot and took his stance. They're coming. Everyone, prepare for battle. Flash! The suspicious stone tablet. As the snow melted, the stone tablet that was frozen underneath emitted light, and then humans poured out from the unknown gate created above it. What the? Why is this place like this? We barely escaped from Liuji Gang. Chinese. The Chinese, emitting an obviously extraordinary aura, grumbled as they looked around the snow-covered field. Covered in blood from head to toe, they were clearly villains. They spotted the Korean Association hunters surrounding them and grinned, revealing their teeth. Huh? Who are these guys? Do they want to fight us? This situation was definitely unexpected even for the Chinese villains. But they didn't flinch and just smirked. Even now, they, still coming out of the gate, easily numbered in the hundreds. On the other hand, there were only a few dozen Koreans. A clear numerical superiority. And the Korean side was currently without S-rank Choi Jong-in. To make matters worse, there were even a few A ranks mixed among the Chinese villains. In that tense situation, Wu Jinchul spoke to them in fluent Mandarin. You've crossed the border. What, you little? So what? There was no point in responding to their glares. Wu Jinchul had already confirmed it. The strange weapons in their hands. Their design resembled the scythe of harvest. Otherworldly weapons. That's what I'm calling them for now. What? Wu Jinchul decided to call the weapons made by the doctor otherworldly weapons. And based on Hassel's experience using it, he knew how powerful those creations were. But so what? Since villains from another country carrying otherworldly weapons have crossed the border, I'll have to take action. Whoosh. Despite the overwhelming disadvantage, Wu Jinchul took the lead and attacked them. Association President! His agility surprised even the Association hunters who were on standby. At the same time, the Chinese villains laughed at him and unleashed a thick killing intent. You idiot! You're walking into your own grave. Yes. At least, it must have seemed that way, to their eyes. But again, Wu Jinchul was a former section chief of the surveillance department. As an elite agent specializing in battles against humans, his main skills were also focused on that, especially in this era where he vowed to solve matters between humans with humans. Wide-range debuff. A silent wave spread from Wu Jinchul. That was the beginning. It was the beginning of all sorts of skills he unleashed, engulfing the entire area one after another. Attack power reduction, speed reduction, dulled senses, defense negation, blind. The Chinese villains' expressions hardened. Suddenly, their bodies became heavy, their strength drained, and their vision darkened. Crazy. Such petty skills. Even while panicking, they instinctively tried to resist the debuff skills he cast, showing how desperately they wanted to survive the chaos. But it was useless. Only 2 years have passed since the cataclysm began. The pandemonium they lived through was only 2 years. Swing! A head flew off from Wu Jinchul's sword strike, without even a scream. Swing! Flash! Slash! Just like that. In the blink of an eye, the next head and the next flew off. Stop him! Ugh! Yes, not magical beasts, but humans. Against fellow humans, Wu Jinchul was invincible. Association President, wiping the blood splattered on his face, looked back at his subordinates and ordered, "What are you doing? Kill them all and retrieve the otherworldly weapons." Yes. A beat late, a resounding answer erupted from their mouths. At the same time, they realized the meaning of Wu Jinchul's words just now, about returning as a hunter, not the Association President. The tremendous achievements that Association President Wu Jinchul had accumulated over the past 2 years, his outstanding political and administrative skills, all the paths he walked were the history of the Korean hunter world. He was the one who suited the position of Association President the most. But that wasn't all. He was a hunter, a skilled warrior who suited the name hunter more than anyone, a true warrior who didn't hesitate to risk his life before the enemy. Wu Jinchul, who had just cut off dozens of heads, was smiling, with a truly carefree expression. "Now I can die," is what you say at a time like this. He was sick of playing it safe. Flash. Wu Jinchul narrowed his eyes at the sight of the countless villains still pouring out of the gate, and he quickly realized the reason why so many of them were flocking to this ruined wasteland at this moment. Circa. There was nothing for them to gain here, except for the elf princess trapped in that ice. Although it was a shame that Choi Jong-in was away on business at a time like this, he already had an alternative. "Come out, Mr. Huang Dongsu. Call me Greed. It's the name the master bestowed upon me." Rumble. Wu Jinchul's shadow lengthened, and the shadow soldier Greed rose with his massive body, and he raised his fist towards the invaders from China, with an extremely sinister, villainous smile. "Welcome, criminals contaminated by a cult." Crash. Greed, the former high priest of the cult of the outer gods, unleashed his full power and struck them. Chapter 309. Chapter 307. At this point, it was necessary to briefly look back on Wang Dongsu's past. Before the cataclysm, Wang Dongsu was a third-rate criminal, living a life at the bottom of society with his older brother, Wang Dongsuk. They were called the Scammer Brothers. For over 20 years, it was a life of going in and out of police stations and prisons, but he thought it was fun, until his brother abandoned him. Get lost, until Wang Dongsuk suddenly awakened and kicked him out for being powerless. "You useless bastard." Wang Dongsu, dumped by his only family, was devastated. He was lost. What should he do now? How should he live? Until then, all he had to do was follow his brother's lead. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol for a while. But that didn't last long. As Wang Dongsuk gained notoriety as a villain, Wang Dongsu, who was tied to him as part of the Scammer Brothers, also became a target of the police. But there's always a way to survive, even if the sky falls, isn't there? Wang Dongsu miraculously awakened while surrounded by the police. A true revival. But what happened? He awakened, but the police chasing him weren't ordinary guys. What the hell? Why is Choi Jong-in here? It was absurd. As if he knew that he would awaken, Choi Jong-in suddenly blocked Hwang Dong-su's path. He was the strongest hunter of the newly formed Hunter Association. His nickname was the Ultimate Weapon, a terrifying S-rank hunter. Since it was impossible to run away from someone like that, he fought. Because there was no other choice. But surprisingly, this might be doable? The battle between Hwang Dong-su and Choi Jong-in was a close one. Thanks to that, Hwang Dong-su realized that the power he awakened to was S-rank. A power incomparably stronger than Hwang Dong-suk, who abandoned him. Courage surged within him. If they fought one-on-one, he might not only be able to escape, but even win. Of course, Choi Jong-in wasn't alone. As if he came fully prepared, he had A-rank and B-rank hunters with him. But they were useless. Kyaha! Get lost before you get caught in the crossfire. Hwang Dong-su laughed loudly and showed off his power to the association hunters. Two S-ranks were fighting. How dare the underlings intervene? They would only be captured as hostages and hold him back. In fact, that was why Hwang Dong-su himself was dumped by Hwang Dong-suk. Crash! Bang! Bang! It was truly earth-shattering. Even in the midst of his breathless battle with Choi Jong-in, Hwang Dong-su looked for an opportunity to take the other small fry as hostages. But then, he realized that there was someone extraordinary among those small fry. Ha! This is an honor. Did even the famous Woo Jinchul come to catch me? Mr. Hwang Dong-su, please surrender obediently. You are still a petty criminal, a damned petty criminal. Hwang Dong-su charged towards Woo Jinchul, who appeared in a suit. And when he reached out to grab him by the collar, whoosh! Even in the face of that sharp attack which tore through the air at terrifying speed, Woo Jinchul calmly loosened his tie with one hand and reached out the other towards Hwang Dong-su. Speed reduction, sense reduction, vision disruption, attack power reduction. At that moment, Hwang Dong-su realized that something was wrong. Why the A-rank Woo Jinchul could order around the S-rank Choi Jong-in. Grab Woo Jinchul's hand finally grabbed Hwang Dong-su's noticeably slower fist. Chains of suppression. Whoosh! What? Hwang Dong-su was shocked. Chains of magic power suddenly flew from all directions and bound his limbs. Of course, they were only A-rank. He unleashed his magic power and tore off the chains of suppression. He began to dispel the debuff skills that were binding him one by one. But the problem was that there were too many. And on top of that, Choi Jong-in was still attacking him. Is that all? You coward! He was furious. Woo Jinchul's appearance, calmly casting petty skills one by one with an S-rank villain right in front of him, was truly annoying. Perhaps that was why. Even with Choi Jong-in's terrifying flames flying towards him from behind, Hwang Dong-su tried to attack Woo Jinchul first. But defense negation. Boom! Woo Jinchul's debuff, cast at the perfect timing, and Choi Jong-in's fire skill that exploded from behind him the moment his defense weakened. Kook! Hwang Dong-su, hit by the truly perfect joint attack, desperately fled. Fortunately, since Choi Jong-in, who was also S-rank, was a magic-type hunter, there was no one who could catch up to Hwang Dong-su's speed once he decided to run. Except for one. Speed reduction. Chains of suppression. Please stop. In the end, because of Woo Jinchul's tenacious debuffs, Hwang Dong-su barely managed to escape while being helplessly hit by all of Choi Jong-in's attacks. He was completely battered, and to heal from that day's injuries, he had to hide for a long time. Completely concealing his identity, he focused on healing his wounds by searching for freelance healers in the shadows, out of the association's sight. Although he wanted to leave Korea right away, it was impossible until his body fully recovered. Then he encountered the Outer Gods cult. At first, Hwang Dong-su didn't even know their name, let alone what kind of group they were. He wasn't interested in the first place. But he couldn't help but keep running into them. Because the Outer Gods cult was also hiding in the shadows, avoiding the association's eyes, just like him. And that was how Hwang Dong-su's connection with them began. You're saying you'll send a healer to treat my wounds? Yes, a B-rank healer, no less. In return, could we ask you for a small favor? Of course. We're not forcing you. The Outer Gods cult approached Hwang Dong-su very carefully and cautiously. Since they were still small at that time, the power of the S-rank villain was very useful. But Huang Dongsu was also cautious. No crimes. If I get caught by the association in this state, don't worry about that. We won't ask you to do anything that noticeable. Just raid a gate that hasn't been discovered by the association yet. That much is fine. Just like that, Huang Dongsu began to fulfill the Outer Gods cult's small requests. Even if he was injured, his S-rank power didn't disappear. And whenever he raided the gates, they requested without the association's knowledge, the healer they sent would come, treat his wounds until his magic power was completely drained, and then leave. But that was only a temporary measure. It would take too long for his body to fully recover this way. Instead of providing a decent healer, the Outer Gods cult rewarded Huang Dongsu in a different way. A hideout. They prepared suitable hideouts for him to avoid the association's eyes. Those hideouts were like rain in a drought for Huang Dongsu, who couldn't stay in one place for long because of that damn Wu Jingchul's nationwide manhunt. And then one day, go to Yangpyeong. The Outer Gods cult requested a new deal with Huang Dongsu, who was almost fully recovered and about to leave this damn South Korea. They whispered to him, who no longer needed a healer, that they knew who killed his brother, Huang Dongsuk, and Huang Dongsu eventually accepted their offer. It wasn't a difficult request anyway. It was just to take care of a certain gate in Yangpyeong, as usual. Since he was about to leave Korea anyway, Huang Dongsu went to Yangpyeong without a word, saying this was the last time. And there, a human who was a priest of the Outer Gods cult greeted him with a bright smile. I've heard a lot about you. My name is Kim Chul. Why are you looking at me like that? Have we met somewhere before? You look familiar. Oh, I was just thinking the same thing. I guess we have a connection. Haha. I don't think we're childhood friends. Did we meet in prison? Oh my, prison? I've always lived a good life, so I've never been near such a scary place. We must have some connection in a past life. Ha ha ha. Past life, my foot. You're not from the association, are you? Oh, how did you know? I recently quit. It wasn't rewarding or fun. Kim Chul's attitude, joking in front of Huang Dongsu, who hated the association, was quite strange. Kim Chul himself also felt strangely familiar with the infamous S-rank villain Huang Dongsu. Anyway, I'll be counting on you for this gate. And here's a little something for you. A necklace? What's this? It's a sacred object sent from our headquarters. I heard you're planning to leave Korea soon? Since we have a connection, it's only right to give you a proper item. Item? What's its function? It's a top-grade stardust necklace that increases recovery speed and amplifies magic power. It will be of great help when you're wandering through other countries alone. Not bad. Was it because of the strange sense of familiarity he felt from Kim Chul? Huang Dongsu accepted the necklace handed to him without any suspicion and put it on. Kim Chul himself was also wearing the same one. Just like that, Huang Dongsu entered the gate under his guidance, and the moment he stepped into the temple of the Outer Gods cult, his memory ended there. And a long time later, Itarim. When he opened his eyes again, a blue light flickered in Huang Dongsu's gaze, and he instinctively realized who he was. I am the high priest who serves the great gods, Itarim. At that moment, he felt a strange incongruity deep within his soul, almost making him nauseous. But that feeling soon disappeared with a throbbing headache. Have you awakened, High Priest? Priest Kim Chul stood before him with an extremely respectful attitude. Huang Dongsu looked at him and asked, I feel a strange incongruity in my body. What is this? I only received some information from headquarters, so I don't know much, just that it's a process of a great and noble experiment. Experiment? For what? Evolution and creation. Evolution and creation? Kim Chul, who became a priest a long time ago, answered with mad eyes at Huang Dongsu's question. Yes, headquarters said that evolution at its peak is not much different from creation. I heard it's a great experiment for that. Evolution at its peak. Truly great. Fucking great. Greed shuddered and gritted his teeth viciously as he recalled that moment of dark history. How dare they turn me into a damn minion of Outer Gods? Who? Not us. Boom! A tremendous force swept over them like a tsunami, an overwhelming power that overturned the earth and seemed to fold the sky in half. There was no point in listening to their answers. Greed just wanted to get rid of these guys who reminded him of his past self. and there was another shadow that subtly rose beside him. I'll join as well. How dare they, to the glorious soldiers of the Master. That was none other than Priest Kim Chul, no, Iron, who returned as a shadow soldier. Grab. Iron's vision suddenly flipped upside down. Greed, grabbing his ankle, swung him like a club and struck the villains. Come to think of it, it was all Iron's fault. Chapter 310, Chapter 308. The general evaluation of hunter ranks was roughly as follows. 1 C rank equals 10 D ranks, 1 B rank equals 10 C ranks, 1 A rank equals 10 B ranks. In short, it meant that to face a hunter 1 rank higher, you needed at least 10 hunters of the lower rank. But this was just a rough estimate. Anyone working in the hunter industry knew that numbers were just that, numbers. First of all, even within the same rank, the amount of magic power varied, the types of skills were diverse, and with roles like tanker, dealer, and healer, it was impossible to compare them one-on-one. There were too many variables and errors to fairly weigh the gap between hunters. Therefore, the most objective measure was to determine a hunter's rank solely based on their magic power. But even those who didn't work in the industry knew that S rank was completely exempt from this calculation, because S rank wasn't a rank in the first place. Beyond rank, immeasurable. The magic power measuring device developed by mankind couldn't evaluate their vast power. Since those who couldn't be measured were called S rank, the statement that it took 10 A ranks to face 1 S rank was completely wrong from the outset. To face one of them, you needed at least 20 A ranks, maybe even more. And depending on the situation, the opponent, or even the S rank hunter's condition that day, it was completely impossible to estimate how many were needed to win. It wasn't for nothing that this era was called the era where the number of S-rank hunters a country had was its national power. It was similar to the principle of nuclear weapon states in the past, but in fact, it was a much more practical and intuitive measure than nuclear weapons. At least nuclear weapons didn't have human rights. Until the launch button was pressed, a nuclear weapon was just a political tool. But S-rank hunters were different. They were literally walking nuclear weapons, living nukes whose buttons could be pressed at any moment. There was no way to restrain them. Whether an S-rank awakened turned into a villain overnight depended entirely on their morality. And that was why Wu Jinchul had been keeping a close eye on the S-rank villain Huang Dongsu. Rumble. This is fortunate. Wu Jinchul couldn't hide his satisfaction that the S-rank variable Huang Dongsu was now fighting on their side as greed, especially since his debuff skills synergized even better with someone of that level. Don't run away. Gather around, you bastards. Bang. Skill. Tremor of the earth. As greed stomped his foot on the ground, a tremendous earthquake spread from that spot. Swept away by that shockwave, the scattered Chinese villains were pulled towards him. And Wu Jinchul added a touch. Chains of suppression. Whoosh! Wu Jinchul's magic chains entangled the villains pulled towards greed like a net. What followed was truly a massacre. Crash! Greed swung iron like a baseball bat, and some villains even died instantly from the impact. Since Iron was originally an A-rank tanker, his sturdy body was a very effective blunt weapon, and his attack power was beyond words. Although it happened against his will, the effect was excellent. Wu Jinchul took advantage of the chaos and ordered the Association hunters, retrieve the otherworldly weapons from their hands while we have the chance. Yes, otherworldly weapons were dangerous. They were suspicious armaments that granted unknown power to the user. The fact that the villains from China could put up this much of a fight against even S-rank greed was proof. So Wu Jinchul left the battle to greed and focused on retrieving the otherworldly weapons from the corpses as quickly as possible, while mixing in debuffs from time to time. Although they had never fought together before, they cooperated seamlessly. Greed felt a strange sense of emotion. Although he regained all his old memories after becoming a shadow soldier, it didn't erase the bad blood he had with Wu Jinchul in this life. How much he suffered because of those damn annoying debuff skills. He had to hide for 2 years, covered in wounds, even though he awakened as an S-rank. It was all because of him. If it was just Choi Jong-in, he could have just lied low, but Wu Jinchul used the association's wanted list and relentlessly chased him. It was truly a sight he never thought he'd see. To think that Wu Jinchul would be on the same side, making his battles much easier with various debuffs. Greed smiled. Well, things like this happen. It was so convenient to have him on the same side. He didn't feel bad at all. Rather, otherworldly weapons. Greed picked up one of the otherworldly weapons from the villain he just killed. The forms of the Chinese otherworldly weapons were all different. If they had this kind of buffing function, they could have mass-produced them, but this variety gave the impression that they were experimentally creating various things. Was it because he was a former high priest? Or was it because he was a shadow soldier? The moment Greed held the otherworldly weapon in his hand, he realized that it was sucking out his magic power. There were plenty of armaments that absorbed magic power, but this felt different. It's not absorbing my magic power for itself. It seems like it's sending it somewhere. Iron, released from Greed, also touched one of the otherworldly weapons and examined the feeling. He too immediately came to a conclusion. I don't think we should touch these things. Greed agreed and nodded. I see. Information about us would leak to someone. Crack. They destroyed the otherworldly weapons in their hands without hesitation, and they retrieved their black mana that was trying to fly away somewhere. After that, Greed approached Wu Jinchul and said, I think I know why that doctor bastard gave these to humans. Yes. It was something I only guessed before I knew the truth about the Outer Gods cult, but it seems like those bastards want to gather information about us from everywhere, don't you think? You already guessed it? Yes. The doctor I met seemed to have a great interest in Awakened. No, humans. You met him directly? What did he look like? Greed was truly curious. How dare he brainwash him, a soldier of the great Shadow Monarch, into a cult? He needed to know the face of that outrageous bastard to get back at him later. If you're curious about his appearance, he was just an ordinary old man. Ordinary old man. Yes, an old man, old enough to suit the title doctor. He was in a wheelchair. At the same time, Suho was staring at the doctor, the apostle of evolution, and asking, I asked who you gave the rest of the weapons to. Well, the young boy, barely 10 years old, still had a relaxed expression despite Suho's pressure. The apostle of evolution shrugged and replied, I don't remember exactly because I handed them out impromptu. Besides, they were all failed products to me. Nevertheless, it seems like they were quite effective weapons for humans, so some even fought and stole them from each other. And that wasn't intentional? Why would I do that? It doesn't matter who's holding them, as long as I extract the information I need. So did you get the information you needed? Yes, quite a bit. Especially the S-rank villain from Korea, Hwang Dong-soo, was a useful test subject. Hwang Dong-soo? Suho and Beru exchanged subtle expressions at the unexpected name, but the Apostle of Evolution continued without concern. As expected, S-ranks are different. Thanks to luckily recruiting Hwang Dong-soo into the Outer Gods cult, I was able to create humanoid weapons from then on. Greed. Just you wait. Beru softly gritted his teeth. At that moment, Greed, who was far away, felt an inexplicable chill run through his spine and had a puzzled expression. Suho also decided to ignore that for now and asked what he was curious about first. So what are humanoid weapons? Did you create humans? Creation. That's God's domain, an area that a mere creation cannot touch, but I've certainly been able to imitate it to some extent. Imitate? Yes. Evolution at its peak is not much different from creation. Look at number 47, whom I gave you. The Apostle of Evolution stretched out his hand and proudly pointed at the woman standing next to Suho. As you can see, No 47 is a human who thinks and speaks on her own, but she doesn't have a soul. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't create a soul. At those words, Suho realized the identity of the bizarre feeling he felt when he first met No 47. So to speak, an AI wearing flesh and blood. The concept is similar, but isn't this much more human? And a much more evolved version. Even if she's injured, she recovers quickly. Like, the Shadow Army? Heh. The Apostle of Evolution's lips stretched into a wide grin at Suho's words that hit the nail on the head. Correct. The Apostle of Evolution, with a deeply satisfied smile, nodded and spread his hands wide. Look, how much effort I've put in. All these failed creations were research that started from the moment I saw the immortal army led by the great shadow monarch from afar in the universe. He recalled the shock he felt the moment he witnessed the shadow army with an ecstatic expression, the immortal army that kept reviving no matter how many times they were killed. The sight of God's soldiers helplessly dying before that sticky power of darkness. Honestly, it was a shock, especially for the Apostle of Evolution, who had been serving his God who created him with loyalty, believing him to be an absolute being. And this question arose, was the creator he served truly an absolute being, even before that great, absolute death? Did you know? Creation and immortality, they're completely opposite concepts. I'm not a god, so creation is absolutely impossible for me. But what about immortality? If I evolve, if I experiment repeatedly, wouldn't it be possible someday? That was the beginning of my research, the reason why I volunteered to come to this earth. I don't know about the others, but at least that was my purpose from the beginning. So, did you succeed? I've achieved half of my goal. Half success. Suho immediately understood what that meant. If the shadow soldiers were an immortal army made of souls, number 47 was a test subject made into a similar state with only a body without a soul, an immortal soldier who could recover quickly from any injury. Except for the difference in materials, he had succeeded in creating a result that was almost identical in appearance. But there was nothing I could do about the other half of the failure. Perhaps because I'm a mere creation, creating a soul was absolutely impossible. An empty vessel without a soul. The Apostle of Evolution, who created immortal soldiers whose bodies could be eternally reused, smacked his lips in regret. But Suho wasn't fooled. His experiment was definitely amazing, and as long as he was alive, his research would continue. And someday, when his research bore new fruit, he'll become my father's enemy. Suho immediately condensed magic power in his fist. The Apostle of Evolution, sensing that, asked, "Why are you suddenly doing that?" "I'll ask one more thing. Step, step." Suho walked towards the Apostle of Evolution, his fist raised. "You created immortal soldiers with an empty vessel without a soul. Then what number test subject are you?" "Ah." The Apostle of Evolution's expression, which had been relaxed from the beginning, finally faltered. Crash! Suho threw his fist. At that moment, everything shattered. All the illusions surrounding the Apostle of Evolution. And beyond that, there was a brain, a pink brain submerged in a small fish tank. Chapter 311, Chapter 309. The Apostle of Evolution suddenly recalled the moment he arrived on this barren planet Earth. The memory of that day when a fragment of his soul, torn from his main body, was sent to this insignificant outer planet on a falling meteorite. That day, there, the Apostle of Evolution's top priority was to completely conceal his presence. I have to hurry, before he finds me. He was desperate. He had succeeded in arriving on this land, barely evading the Shadow Army's senses, but he couldn't predict when that fearsome king of darkness would discover him. So the Apostle of Evolution decided to first hide his presence by possessing the bodies of the natives of this planet. But then an unexpected problem occurred. A suitable vessel to withstand me?
Juke.
They kept dying. The moment his magic power touched their souls, they died instantly without him even doing anything. The vessel was broken. The natives of this planet were incredibly weak. A suitable vessel. The process of finding one was much more difficult than he expected. He was truly bewildered. This is absurd. Why are the creatures here so weak? Moreover, he was just a small fragment, split to avoid the eyes of the Shadow Army. But even this was too much for the vessels to handle. Considering the overwhelming power of the Shadow Army he encountered in the distant universe, the creatures living on this planet, behind the battlefield, were so pathetic that even calling them insignificant was a compliment. Did they degenerate from the peaceful comfort? It was too strange, no matter how he thought about it. Even if all the combatants were out in space and only non-combatants remained here, weren't they still too weak? But he decided to postpone satisfying that curiosity. Since he didn't know when he would be discovered hiding on this planet, finding a vessel to conceal his presence as soon as possible was the priority. And then he noticed the dying elderly. Even the lifespans of the creatures on this land are short. Beep, beep, beep. The elderly, lying on their sickbeds with withered bodies, their breathing growing faint, the sight of doctors waiting to declare their deaths. A A strange curiosity suddenly arose within the Apostle of Evolution, who happened to discover the place called a hospital. Humans lying side by side, dying. Feeble souls waiting for the moment to leave their vessels. That series of scenes was enough to stimulate the Apostle of Evolution's curiosity. I have a good idea. If a vessel with an owner couldn't accept his magic power, what about a vessel without an owner? If he took over a vessel that had its life functions stopped with its owner's death, a vessel that had lost its owner, whoosh, since he had nothing to lose, he immediately tried. He failed the first few times. It was extremely difficult to get the timing right, but there were plenty of test subjects. Countless elderly people were lying in the hospital, ready to become his vessel, and after a few attempts, the Apostle of Evolution finally succeeded. Bap! He captured the moment when the heart of an old man on the verge of death stopped, and the invader from outer space safely settled into the empty vessel left by his departing soul. He began to spread his magic power through the body, which was rapidly cooling down due to the end of its lifespan, quickly but secretly. But the doctors and nurses, insensitive to mana, didn't notice what was happening before their eyes. Twitch, especially the fact that the moment his heartbeat stopped, the tip of the old man's finger with age spots all over it moved slightly. No one saw that. Bep! He has passed away. Just like that, the old man was declared dead without any unusual events, and the body was immediately moved to another location for the funeral. The funeral was small, but no one shed tears. Instead, frequent arguments broke out around the old man's body. They argued about the division of property, but those were things that didn't matter to the Apostle of Evolution. Who cared about what kind of life this old man had lived? The Apostle of Evolution was only interested in the fact that this dead body was still intact, even after containing a fragment of him. Success! It's a success! The otherworldly invader was laughing joyfully inside the cooled corpse, a body that was already dead, but because of that, a body that could no longer die. Of course, very delicate magic power control was required from now on. Resurrection of the dead. Or strictly speaking, this was an interception of a vessel just before that. I'll have to remodel the inside so this body can move again. And so, 3 days. The work of recycling the broken vessel slowly progressed over 3 days. On the outside, nothing seemed to have changed, but an amazing miracle was happening inside the old man's body. Twitch. The old man's cold body in the coffin began to twitch. First the fingertips, then the toes. Something was starting at the furthest point from the heart. But unfortunately, those who were surrounding the old man for 3 days, focused only on his assets, couldn't see that wondrous miracle. Creak, until the old man opened the coffin lid himself and sat up. Father? The Apostle of Evolution successfully disguised himself, but he couldn't outwardly express the joy of his success. He remained expressionless even as he watched the humans screaming around him. Although he succeeded in moving the body below his neck using magic power, it was still difficult to control all the facial muscles. Crack, creak. The old man's appearance, frozen with an expressionless face and stiff neck muscles, was truly bizarre and terrifying. The reactions of those who witnessed that sight were all the same. No one was happy or moved by the fact that their family member came back to life. They either fainted or collapsed, trembling in fear. Shock, fear, and horror. The Apostle of Evolution, who unintentionally created that situation just by getting up, still remained expressionless. Rather than wasting magic power on facial expressions, solving the internal problems was the priority. Brain. He had been pouring magic power into the brain, which was rapidly losing its function along with the old man's death, for 3 days. The task of absorbing the myriad of information about this planet stored in the brain required very delicate and meticulous magic power control, and among that knowledge was language ability. Finally, success. When he finally succeeded in opening his mouth and communicating, the reactions of those around him reached their peak. It had been 3 days since the doctors declared the old man dead. For the corpse that hadn't breathed for days to suddenly come back to life from the coffin and even speak. This was truly unbelievable. No, a miracle. Gee God. Suddenly, someone's mutter reached the ears of the Apostle of Evolution and was transmitted to his brain, and as he interpreted the exact meaning, an expression finally appeared on the old man's face, which had been blank. There were over 200 muscles on a human face. In the end, creating an expression was a troublesome task that required organically moving all those muscles. But despite that, the Apostle of Evolution wanted to express laughter. God. Because the word that came out of that frightened creature's mouth referred to the one who sent him to this land. Grin. God. Although a bit awkward, the Apostle of Evolution smiled broadly and muttered that word, and his awkward expression quickly found its place. His clumsy speech also gradually became fluent. I am not God, just an apostle of God. And as the Apostle of Evolution said that, no, as the old man who rose from the coffin said that, a truly divine radiance descended upon him. So please listen carefully. The one who sent me said. The Apostle of Evolution extended his bony hand towards the humans who were on the verge of fainting before that dazzling halo, and continued, Worship God, praise God, prove your faith. Those who don't follow this rule, Flash, will not return alive. It was the birth of the cult of the outer gods. A pink brain. This is what I've been through. The illusion that the brain trapped in the test tube showed Suho past like a flash in less than a second. Why did you show me this? Of course, it's to induce sympathy. It's good to be honest. Suho chuckled at the words of the Apostle of Evolution's main body, but his eyes, staring at the brain, were sharper than ever. You're awfully confident for someone who was caught hiding. It's natural for any living being to beg for its life. You're awfully pathetic for an apostle of Itarim. Well, what can I do? There's nowhere left to run from here. Besides, I never expected you, Mr. Sung Suho, to find me so quickly. Why that face? Are you suspicious that I might be plotting something else here? There's nothing more. You're good at reading expressions, even without eyes. Suho narrowed his eyes at the brain in the test tube. As if shrugging, the pink jelly wriggled. That's not difficult. All the test subjects I created are my sensory organs. But how did you see through my illusion? I put a lot of effort into creating it. The pink brain, the Apostle of Evolution, asked with genuine curiosity. This place, where his main body was hidden, was a hideout he created with all his heart. It was a secret place, hidden with double and triple layers of dimensional cracks, complex mazes, and even illusions. But Suho saw through all that and found his main body right away. You're full of questions. Suho dismissed his query and answered as if it was obvious. If you're researching immortality, it means you don't want to die, right? But you acted as if you didn't care what happened even with me in front of you, so I just broke it. Suho grinned, revealing his fist with black energy blazing to the brain, which had suddenly become quiet. Chapter 312, Chapter 310. This is the origin of the Outer Gods cult. Having finally found the main body of the Apostle of Evolution, Suho felt somewhat empty, a pink brain trapped in a fish tank. Because of this insignificant thing, the cult was born, and things like stardust and star pieces spread throughout the world. Because of this insignificant thing, Suho asked, but how did you end up with just a brain? It was inefficient to keep moving that old body. So I evolved. You call that evolution? I think, therefore I am. A famous quote from the philosopher Descartes. After awakening in the old man's body, the Apostle of Evolution read many books to learn about this world. Meanwhile, those who were forcibly indoctrinated formed a religious group called the Outer Gods cult around him, and they began to increase their influence in the shadows in various ways. And at the center of that quiet storm, the Apostle of Evolution just sat in a wheelchair and read the books written by humans. Books. They convey information in a truly primitive way on this planet. The Apostle of Evolution could transmit the necessary information to someone in a second if he wanted to. So he was even more interested in this primitive and inefficient reading, because it was so absurd, to spread information to others with subjective and biased interpretations, instead of just transmitting the memories as they are. How inefficient. Russell. The Apostle of Evolution continued to be engrossed in reading despite his grumbling. The more he read, the more this reading method of knowledge transfer increased his thirst for knowledge. Since the information in each book was different, he couldn't figure out which one was correct, so he kept reading. He read and read. The creatures here engaged in fierce debates through books and papers on a single topic, and they were making very slow progress little by little. It was also a kind of evolution, the Apostle of Evolution concluded, and he finally realized it's the brain that ultimately controls the human body. So I got rid of all the unnecessary parts and left only what I needed, and I regressed. Smirk. The pink brain wriggled as if raising its nose. This is the result. How efficient is it? I just give orders from within here, and the dolls that move like my limbs according to my instructions are increasing. That is the direction of evolution I chose. That's right, the Outer Gods cult. As he said, even at this moment, countless humans were actively working as his limbs under the name of the Outer Gods cult all over the world, according to their faith, following the orders from the headquarters of the Outer Gods cult, driven by their desire to become stronger. Stardust, stardust necklaces, star pieces, the magic power amplified by them, and the wealth and honor that followed. The Outer Gods cult had been increasing its influence with those numerous baits. Although the villain's momentum was suppressed in South Korea thanks to Association President Woo Jinchul, it was different in other countries. The larger the country, the more difficult it was to control criminals. And villains were even more troublesome. Especially the world of shadows, where they operated, was governed by the law of the jungle. The ones who desperately needed the stardust spread by the Outer Gods cult were the villains. That's how the Outer Gods cult was born. The Outer Gods cult. Although it was definitely a group that gathered under that name at first, in regions where the apocalypse progressed, like North Korea and China, it sometimes shed its religious color and developed into a city-state entirely composed of villains. Like the city paradise that Suho destroyed in North Korea. And at this very moment, the Apostle of Evolution, who was talking to Suho, suddenly stopped. Finally. The pink brain in the test tube trembled, showing a strange sense of satisfaction. Suho's eyes narrowed. Finally, what? Even as Suho raised his fist as if to break the test tube, the Apostle of Evolution answered without concern. His voice even sounded somewhat excited. All preparations are finally complete. Rumble. Before the Apostle of Evolution could even finish his words, he felt a tremendous tremor, as if the entire space was collapsing. Suho, sensing the change, immediately took out his dagger and swung it. Crack! The test tube split in half, and the transparent liquid inside splattered. At the same time, as Suho extended his other hand, the pink brain inside floated up and flew towards Suho. The Apostle of Evolution, caught in that invisible hand, wasn't flustered but rather intrigued. Ah, this is the ruler's authority. You are a truly amazing person. If I had the time, I would have liked to capture and study you myself. It's truly a shame. What do you mean? He was relaxed, even though his brain could explode if Suho clenched his hand. It means that the final test subject I created has just been completed. The moment he heard those words, Suho expanded his senses and searched the surroundings, but he couldn't feel anything. Just this space, this dimension itself, collapsing. Please leave now. This place will collapse soon. You can kill me or leave me behind. My role is over. Rumble. With those words, the dungeon surrounding Suho began to collapse like a shattered window, along with the Apostle of Evolution's lab inside. My liege! This way! Suho ran in the direction Beru urgently pointed and escaped through the gate he entered, still holding the pink brain in his hand. Even if you take me, I'll die soon. That test tube you just broke was artificially keeping this brain alive. Suho felt a strange sensation at the calm reaction of the Apostle of Evolution in his hand. You seem relieved? For someone who's been researching immortality? Because I have no regrets even if I die now. What did you do? Heh, you'll find out someday. By the way, even if I die like this, you won't be able to turn me into a shadow soldier. My fragment contained in this brain isn't enough to be converted into a shadow soldier. Suho knew that. He couldn't turn the apostles of Itarim he met so far into shadow soldiers. This was similar to the reason why Sung Jinwoo couldn't turn the dead monarchs into soldiers after the war. The apostles of Itarim were on a similar level to the dead monarchs. But not everyone was like that. The Apostle of Evolution had seen it countless times, that terrifying sight. Sung Jinwoo, whom he witnessed from afar in outer space, killing Itarim's soldiers and instantly raising them as his shadow army. When you witnessed that absurdly great and overwhelming sight with your own eyes, you couldn't help but shudder, especially if you were an enemy. Perhaps it was from then that the Apostle of Evolution wanted to imitate Sung Jinwoo's great power. The Shadow Monarch, the king who rules death. That was truly the pinnacle of evolution in his mind. So he desperately researched it as soon as he arrived on this planet. The result of imitating him to gain a power as similar as possible was the immortal being like number 47, a biological weapon without a soul. But even though they looked similar on the outside, it was a great insult to compare his dolls to the Shadow Army. Not only was the inherent power different, but the most terrifying aspect of the Shadow power was that it stole the enemy's soul and turned them into an ally. On the other hand, what about his test subjects? He couldn't even think about turning his enemies into them. He had to create every test subject manually, one at a time. And even if he wanted to mass-produce them like in a factory, not only were the materials expensive, but a very delicate crafting process was also required. In short, it was terribly inefficient, a complete failure. But the Apostle of Evolution loved the human saying, "Failure is the mother of success." Thanks to experiencing those fiascos over and over again, he finally achieved a single success. The result was a little different from his original goal, but it was still quite satisfying. Circa. Suho's eyes widened at the sudden mention of the name. Wait, don't tell me? I was truly surprised when I first found out, to think that there was a successor who inherited the power of a dead monarch, that a method to evolve an ordinary creature into an apostle-level being like us existed on this planet. At that time, in the place where Circa was sleeping as an ice pillar, a change was occurring while Wu Jinchul and Greed were busy slaughtering the villains who came from China. Whoosh! What? Wu Jinchul, startled by the sudden phenomenon, looked around with wide eyes. Red blood that used to stain the pure white snowfield, and all the blood from the corpses of the countless villains they killed began to gush out and rise towards the sky. Splash! Be careful, it's the divine power of outer gods. At Greed's urgent warning, everyone looked up at the crimson-red lump that formed in the sky with tense eyes. It wasn't just blood. Greed, the former high priest of the outer gods cult, and Iron, the former priest, could feel the tremendous divine power emanating from that grotesquely wriggling lump, and they instinctively understood why it suddenly appeared here. Stop it, don't let it approach Circa. It was too late. Before they could even finish their words, whoosh! The red lump of blood created in the air flew straight towards the ice pillar where Circa was sleeping. Block it with your bodies. Greed and Iron leaped into the sky without hesitation. Was that to buy time? Suho glared at the pink brain and asked, to steal Circa while I'm stuck here? No. As I said before, Hunter Sung Suho, you arrived much earlier than I expected. If you had followed my original schedule, I wouldn't have met you here, and I wouldn't have died by your hand. But the experiment was successful, so this much deviation is not a problem. Although he was flustered by Suho's unexpected actions, the Apostle of Evolution's attitude didn't change much from when they first met. The reason he told Suho all his plans wasn't to stall for time. The reason he revealed all his plans to Suho wasn't to stall either. Humans are the same, aren't they? Those who, like me, work hard behind the scenes are always eager to share their achievements with others when they finally succeed. In that sense, I just wanted to tell you about all the hardships I've gone through with a pure heart. So now I have no regrets, even if I die. Now, quickly kill me and go save Circa. Though it might be too late. You're lying until the end, whether you learned well about humans or not. Suho chuckled as he watched the Apostle of Evolution giving his last words. No regrets even if you die? That's not it. You're thinking of entering that test subject yourself when you die here, aren't you? The Apostle of Evolution finally burst into laughter at Suho's sharp remark. Huh, you never cease to amaze me, human. That laughter sounded like the hearty chuckle of a seasoned old man and the hysterical giggle of a naive child at the same time. That's correct. And even if you don't kill me, the result is the same. This brain has just lost its vitality. This voice is just the remnants of my last remaining magic power. Yes, I'm busy, so let's meet again there. Suho grinned, glaring at the fading brain, and shadow exchange. At that moment, Suho's entire body was enveloped in shadows and his vision was turned upside down. Whoosh! And Suho, who switched places with Iron, saw the red lump of blood flying towards Circa. "Hey, nice to see you again." The Apostle of Evolution, who entered the lump of blood just in time, answered Suho's greeting. But he had already become a completely different being. That being was the culmination of all the research he had done and the final evolution, having completely absorbed the last remaining nutrients left by the dead Apostle of Paradise through the sacrifice of the villains. The Nightmare Apostle is hostile towards you. The Apostle of Evolution appeared before Suho with a new name. Nightmare Apostle? Whoosh! A terrifying killing intent, chilling to the bone, washed over Suho like a tsunami. Rumble. I'll block him. Greed, confirming that Suho, who went to Russia, had returned, jumped in front of him without hesitation and blocked the red tsunami. That thing, which was just a lump of blood at first, began to emit a tremendously ominous aura as soon as the Apostle of Evolution dwelled within, spreading in all directions, enough to dye the pure white snowfield, even this cold, completely red. A bizarre energy is filling the surroundings. I'll go first, since we don't know what that guy is. Black steam blazed from Greed's entire body as he stepped forward to protect Suho, but the red tsunami swallowed him whole like fog. They couldn't tell what was happening within from the outside. The Nightmare Apostle is laughing at you. Are you laughing? Suho's eyebrows twitched. Beru. Yes, my Lige. Suho asked, what happens if you eat this? Holding up the Apostle of Evolution, which was still in his hand, Beru's lips stretched into a wide grin. I'll tell you after I eat it. Skill, devour. Beru swallowed the brain without hesitation. Chomp! Chapter 313, Chapter 311. The moment he swallowed the brain, where the Apostle of Evolution resided, Beru's devour skill began to absorb all the memories within. A tremendous amount of information flooded into him, but it was inefficient to accept all of it. He had to carefully select the most important and valuable things from this vast, disorganized pool of memories. And then... Suddenly, Beru, who had chomped down on the brain, let out a roar with his mouth wide open. That chilling scream was filled with a deep joy. Because the first thing that came to him from the Apostle of Evolution's memories was the image of his great and proud master. Arise, the deep bottomless darkness, the shadow of the distant abyss, the king who rules over death, the shadow monarch. Indeed, an overwhelming sense of fear and terror towards the shadow monarch. That was the emotion at the very bottom of the Apostle of Evolution's heart. Beru, trembling with pride and joy, began to explore his memories. And starting with that, the countless experiences he went through and the thoughts the Apostle of Evolution had began to flood Beru's mind like puzzle pieces. Monarch. What is a monarch? Until relatively recently, the only monarch the Apostles of Itarim knew was the shadow monarch they encountered in outer space. Indeed, they didn't know much about this universe. Honestly, they underestimated it. Their original goal was invasion, not war. The reason they came here was to scavenge the masterless mana. But a variable appeared, the shadow monarch who blocked their path. The mighty power he displayed, that tremendous and great ability, overwhelmed even the armies of Itarim possessing the brilliant divine power. And the most terrifying thing was that his power didn't simply kill the enemy, but resurrected their souls and recycled them as loyal soldiers who served him. So, that's where the misunderstanding arose. Until that moment, the name Monarch that the Apostles of Itarim knew referred to that fearsome and overwhelming being, at least until they came to Earth. When they finally arrived in the dimension guarded by the Shadow Monarch, after going around the vast universe, a truly shocking truth awaited them. Oh my God. There was more than one Shadow Monarch? It was a shock. They realized that there was more than one monarch in this universe. A variable. We need to inform headquarters. Impossible. We've come too far. To convey this information, we would have to go back all that way. This was a real disaster. The apostles, who had arrived in this remote region one after another, were confused for a while. They went through all the trouble of going around the universe to avoid the Shadow Monarch and reach the rear. But there were several more beings equal to him here. The frustration they felt when they first discovered this information was indescribable. I can't believe it. There were many monarchs, like our apostles. There were more beings like the Shadow Monarch? What is this universe? Indeed, this is the only way a god could be killed by its creations. Anyway, if there are more like the Shadow Monarch here, there's nothing we can do. Then what should we do? Let's hide for now. If the monarchs find us, we'll instantly die. No, even after death, we won't be safe. I agree. Let's lay low and assess the situation. Yes, I'll change my plan to gather as much information as possible while hiding, and then convey all that to headquarters. That was when it started. When they began to gather information about this dimension while completely concealing themselves. Although they served different gods, they were all fighting against the common enemy, the Shadow Monarch. So they agreed to share any information they found because they all had countless questions. So where are the other monarchs? Why didn't the other monarchs participate in the war? The investigation revealed that some monarchs are dead. Then what about the others? Are they alive? Is it possible that all the other monarchs are dead? This was a truly important question. The moment those equal to the Shadow Monarch all went out to outer space, the balance of the war that had been precariously maintained would instantly collapse. And then they found out. Good news. According to the investigation, there is a very high probability that the other monarchs are already dead. Confirmed here as well. I found out that the Shadow Monarch killed all the other monarchs. Then did he absorb all their power and become that strong? No, I don't think so. If that were possible, we would have already encountered other monarchs who became part of the Shadow Legion in outer space. Then where did their power go? I found out. It seems like the power of the dead monarchs remains dormant in the sea of the afterlife until a successor of each race appears. You mean it's masterless? Confirmed. It was a huge relief. They were surprised to learn that there were more like the Shadow Monarch, but it turned out they were already dead. As they discovered the dimensions of the dead monarchs one by one, drifting through the dimensional gap, that information became more and more certain. There were no variables. That's a relief. Then all we have to do is avoid the Shadow Monarch? No, I don't think we even need to worry about the Shadow Monarch. He won't have the time to care about what's happening beyond the battlefield. Don't let your guard down. We have to assume that the Shadow Monarch is capable of anything. That's going a bit too far. Even the Shadow Monarch is just a creation of God. He's just a very powerful weapon. So what do you want to do? It means we can be more proactive than before. They disagreed. The apostles, who had been cooperating to gather information, began to have conflicting opinions the moment they confirmed the deaths of the other monarchs. Then it would be better to move separately from now on. Agreed, but we should continue to share information in case there are more variables. All right, from that moment on, they began to act on their own, with their own goals and methods, only occasionally contacting each other. But even without saying it out loud, they already knew what the others were aiming for. The power of the dead monarchs. If they could claim that masterless power, they too could become as strong as the Shadow Monarch. And then they discovered the High Elves, the race with the highest chance of inheriting the power of the King of the Snowfolk, the Frost Monarch, who was now dead. Found where the High Elves are gathered. Planted divine power in the tree they serve. Taught faith to the High Elves. They are now our loyal followers. So now, no matter who inherits the monarch's power, but no one said what would come next. There was no need to discuss who would claim that power until the plan succeeded. Since they each served different gods, they naturally wanted to offer that tremendous power to their own Itarim. So they simply thought that when that time came, there might be conflict among them, and they needed to be prepared. But one apostle had a slightly different idea, the Apostle of Evolution. He wanted to claim the power of the dead monarch for himself, not offer it to God. And he was shocked to realize that his curiosity, his desire to become stronger, had surpassed his faith in God. He was well aware where this blasphemous thought originated from. The creatures of this universe killed their God? Was that really possible? When the Apostle of Evolution first heard that shocking information, he was stunned, I can't believe that's possible. I never even imagined it. Honestly, it hurt his pride a little. The Apostle of Evolution considered himself the wisest of all creations. At the same time, he also thought of himself as the most loyal servant of God. He believed that his overflowing curiosity and intelligence were blessings bestowed upon him by his beloved God. But that curiosity, the moment it encountered that incredibly blasphemous truth, began to be twisted in a previously unimaginable direction. Then is it possible for me as well? Creation's killing God? That was blasphemy. Something that should never happen, a taboo that shouldn't even be imagined. So, the Apostle of Evolution did not come up with such a bold idea on his own. He was simply curious if he too could become strong enough to kill God. Could he evolve into such a powerful and overwhelming being? Yes, perhaps I too can become like the Shadow Monarch. It was a pure curiosity that he could have as the Apostle of Evolution, and that curiosity led to research, the countless results of which were this moment. Circa. Indeed, not the High Elves. When he learned that the Frost Monarch chose a completely different elf as his successor, the Apostle of Evolution thought it was time for his research to bear fruit, and he immediately put it into action. The entire area was dyed in a red fog. Numerous system messages appeared before Suho, and at that moment, Greed, who had been swallowed by the red fog, suddenly popped his head out and urgently warned him. Something's wrong. I can't damage this fog no matter what I do. Physical attacks, magic attacks, nothing works. Beru responded to that. Little Monarch. The conclusion Beru reached after going through the Apostle of Evolution's memories was much more despairing than he expected. This entire area is a mixture of the nightmare he created in reality. No matter how much you attack and kill him here, he'll just come back to life. But waking up from a nightmare? Yes. Half success, half failure. His original goal was to evolve into a being like the Master, but although the method is a bit different, he succeeded in at least becoming like a shadow soldier, and to become even stronger. Suho could immediately guess what would come next. Just in time, an urgent message arrived from Silad. The king of the snowfolk, the Frost Monarch, requests help. The Nightmare Apostle is interfering with Circa's dream. At this moment, Suho and Beru finally realized where the Nightmare Apostle was. In the dream of Circa, who was sleeping inside the ice pillar. He was trying to enter there and steal the power of the Frost Monarch. Silad, Suho shouted, and Silad immediately summoned Suho to his world. Passive skill unknown is activated. Time stopped, and Suho's vision was flipped. His mind began to endlessly fall into the distant abyss. Just like when Ezel failed the succession ceremony and fell into the sea of the afterlife towards the world tree. But this wasn't Suho's first time, so he wasn't flustered. Even as he fell, he calmly glared at the abyss, where not a single ray of light could be seen. But something unexpected happened. Beru uses skill, Nightmare. What? Beru appeared beside the falling Suho. Beru was also confused. Little Monarch, where are we? The two fell together into Circa's nightmare. Chapter 314, Chapter 312. A blizzard raged across the pure white snowfield. Tap, tap, tap. Circa had been dreaming for some time now. Her seemingly perpetual journey across the icy sea without shoes was merely a figment of her imagination. Suddenly, she looked down at her feet on the frozen surface, and she saw something. Crack! Every time Circa's small foot took a step, cracks spread across the surface. The ice was so thin it felt like an eggshell. It seemed like even a slight misstep would cause it to shatter. And below that, splash, splash. The pitch-black sea of the abyss rippled. It was so deep that she couldn't see the bottom. Whirl. Circa's small body swayed from the harsh blizzard that suddenly swept in from all directions. Thankfully, she quickly regained her balance and stepped forward, carefully but with firm steps that never faltered. Her footprints followed behind her like a long tail. Seeing that, Circa suddenly recalled the past. From when she was very young. No, from the moment she was born until now. It was familiar. This harsh, cold winter was the playground and grave of the Ice Elves. A harsh frost where only the footprints of those who survived remained, and the grave of the countless kin who couldn't leave their footprints and were buried in the cold. Those who survived were the strong. I am strong. Circa moved forward with unwavering steps, and after walking for a while, she saw something. Her eyes narrowed. Beyond the seemingly endless white blizzard, a giant shadow flickered in the distance. A pillar? At first she thought it was a very tall pillar, but when she looked closer, she realized it wasn't. After walking for a while, Circa finally understood what it was. The World Tree. The World Tree. The divine tree where the power of the rulers resided. A majestic pillar, incomparable to Elvenwood. And the tree that held the primordial darkness. As Circa finally found her destination and her footsteps turned towards it, Circa. Flinch. Circa's head turned in surprise at the sudden voice. All she could see was a white blizzard, but the voice continued. You are not qualified to be a monarch. Crack! Suddenly, the ground beneath her caved in and her bare feet were submerged in the black sea below. That was the moment when Circa's dream turned into a nightmare. Crack! 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 The ice shattered! The nightmare suddenly struck. A harsh cold swept in, even fiercer than before, centered around her. The blizzard completely obscured her vision, and Circa's sharp ears twitched in surprise at the sound of cracking coming from under her feet. Crack! The ice beneath Circa began to shatter like a spider web, and black water gushed out from the cracks. Splash! What jumped out from the pitch-black water was a hideous monster, a magical beast resembling a shark, but much more grotesque and terrifying. It lunged towards her with its maw wide open, filled with fangs. Circa barely dodged those teeth by twisting her body, but that was only the beginning. Splash! 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 Countless monsters began to emerge from the Black Sea. The ice continued to shatter. Circa desperately moved her feet as the surface she could stand on gradually decreased. The World Tree. I have to get to the World Tree. Using the pinnacle of the elven footsteps, Circa leaped from one ice shard to another, using them like stepping stones. Each stride was precarious. It felt like she would become prey to the countless monsters chasing her if she made even a single mistake. Truly a nightmare. Circa's dream had turned into a nightmare where she was desperately running away from monsters. And then she heard a voice from behind. Give up. That place is more suited to me. The Nightmare Apostle, the one who turned Circa's dream into a nightmare, spoke. I will take the monarch's power. Don't be ridiculous. That power is mine. As if mocking Circa's outburst, the monster's attacks became even fiercer. But she didn't change direction and continued running towards the World Tree, faintly visible in the distance. And as she did, the Nightmare Apostle's attacks became even stronger. That was when, crack, something unidentified was blocking Circa's path. At first it was just a lumpy pink mass, but as the shape became clearer, Circa couldn't help but be surprised. That's me? A face that looks exactly like her, but the skin was pitch black and the hair was silver like moonlight. Dark Elf. The Apostle of Nightmare, who had transformed into a form that was called that, looked down at the real Circa's entire body with a cold gaze. The power of ice and winter. Your vessel is too insignificant to contain that. What I have is efficient. At that moment, all the nightmares surrounding Circa became more intense. A heavy snowstorm blew in, obscuring her vision. The monsters that had been drooling across the thin sheet of ice rushed in with even greater ferocity to devour her. In the meantime, swoosh! An ice arrow shot by the Apostle of Nightmare flew towards Circa, who barely avoided it, but that wasn't the end. Just like the number of monsters, the number of arrows also increased. But even in all this, she never forgot her purpose. The World Tree? Just a little bit. It's too hard to fight. There is no need to fight. Circa continued to run forward, ignoring the numerous nightmarish voices, and as a result, the World Tree was getting closer and closer, but the Apostle of Nightmare's attacks also became more intense. Ah! Finally, a black ice shard grazed Circa's leg, leaving a wound, and a smile appeared on the Dark Elf's lips. I got you. Suddenly, hideous tentacles sprouted from Circa's wound and wrapped around her leg. She instinctively realized their identity. Elvenwood. You're trying to turn me into Elvenwood. Indeed, those scraps are much more suited to you than the World Tree. The nightmare smiled with satisfaction, and at his gesture, countless tentacles resembling tree roots soared up from the Black Sea and attacked Circa, trying to drag her into the pitch-black water. Oh no! At that desperate moment, Circa closed her eyes tightly. And then, flash! Suddenly, from high above, a single ray of darkness fell like lightning. Boom! That darkness cut through all the tentacles and pulled Circa, who was falling into the Black Sea, back up. Circa was startled as someone lifted her in their arms and hurriedly checked their face. "Are you all right?" "Suho? How did you get here?" Sung Suho. He had intervened between Circa and the Nightmare Apostle, and Beru as well. "So this is where you ran away to?" Beru roared fiercely from Suho's shoulder. Although he was small and didn't look threatening, the killing intent in that roar was real. Suho glared at the Nightmare Apostle with Circa in his arms and raised his lips. "I told you I'd see you soon. You actually followed me here? Nothing ever goes according to plan when you're involved." The Nightmare Apostle, who had taken Circa's form, let out a hollow laugh, seemingly a bit dumbfounded. But that was all. He always had a backup plan. Besides, it wasn't like his scheme had completely failed. "You know, my plan had already succeeded the moment I interfered with this succession ceremony." The Nightmare Apostle, quickly regaining his composure, bowed elegantly towards Suho. "I didn't choose nightmares as my path of evolution for nothing." He had gathered information from all over the world and calculated every possible scenario. Even if there were some variables, the result wouldn't change. Even the fact that Sung Suho was the Shadow Monarch's son, that he had become the priest of the monarchs, was all part of his plan. "This is already a nightmare that I rule. Even you can't use your power here." The moment he snapped his fingers, splash! Space distorted, and they were all pulled into the Black Sea. And at that moment, Suho's shadow disappeared. The dark ocean was like a world without light, a void where even darkness couldn't exist. Can you see? The Nightmare Apostle spread his arms wide at the center of that void. "I can do anything in this nightmare that I rule, and no one can use their power here without my permission. Your shadow is the same." At that moment, hideous monsters swam through the sea of the abyss towards Suho. They're called void sharks, maggots that clean up the scraps of the dimension by wandering the void. Void sharks. The countless shark-like monsters that attacked Circa now rushed towards Suho to devour him, their maws wide open with sharp fangs bared. But is this all? Suho wasn't flustered at all and just stood tall, tilting his head with Circa still in his arms. "Suho! It's dangerous!" Circa was terrified and struggled in Suho's arms. But he just patted her and calmly spoke to the Nightmare Apostle, who was looking down at them with an arrogant expression. "You seem to be mistaken about one thing." Suho took a step into the sea of the abyss. Then, surprisingly, a shadow bloomed from under his feet. The Nightmare Apostle's eyes widened in surprise. "You rule nightmares." A cold smile appeared on Suho's lips. "But darkness doesn't belong to you." Using Skill Monarch's domain, Suho's shadow exploded from under his feet. "Darkness belongs to my father." That pitch-black shadow began to devour all the attacks the Nightmare Apostle created. "And you don't seem to know because this is your first time here, but this is the Sea of the Afterlife, where the World Tree is. Kill him." The Nightmare Apostle, flustered for the first time, desperately strengthened the nightmare. Shark-like monsters, tentacles resembling tree roots, all of them rushed to tear Suho to shreds. But even as he watched that, Suho calmly reached out his hand and ordered, "Arise." And then, it was as if time stopped. The void sharks, which had their maws wide open right before Suho, froze in unison, and their forms distorted grotesquely, scattering like black smoke and gathering again. Just like that, new shadow soldiers were born. The Nightmare Apostle couldn't help but be shocked. "What? Whether you control the nightmares or not, this has long been the world my father ruled." At Suho's words, the terrible nightmares that had been hindering Circa turned towards the Nightmare Apostle and lunged at him with their maws open. Chapter 3513. Where did it all go wrong? When the Nightmare Apostle realized that something had gone wrong with his perfect plan, it was already too late. His gaze quickly swept over the surroundings in that critical moment, the abyss of falling souls, the endlessly deep sea of the afterlife. Within that depth, the scraps of souls that had lost everything and simply existed were floating around with blank expressions. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. If you looked a little deeper into the abyss, you would see countless hideous scraps sinking below. Any living being who caught a glimpse of that sight would instinctively feel an ominous chill. It was that grotesque and terrifying. Indeed, this place, the Sea of the Afterlife, was like a landfill, a dimensional trash can where the scraps of the dead piled up and rotted away. But even that scenery was alluring to the Nightmare Apostle, because the power that could fulfill his desires existed here. A monarch wasn't simply the king of a race, but the primordial darkness itself. In other words, regardless of the title, the power of primordial darkness was what was important. And after a long period of research, he learned that the world tree played the role of passing on the primordial darkness to the new monarch. So the Nightmare Apostle came up with a plan to drag the scraps here into his nightmare and hinder Circa's succession ceremony. To become Circa's nightmare, invade her dream, and steal the primordial darkness. The foundation of the Nightmare Apostle was evolution. To kill Circa, become Circa, and turn into the monarch, that was the end goal of his plan. And that plan was perfect, at least until Sung Suho appeared. Kya! Chomp! Chomp! Gak! A scream escaped his mouth. It hurt. It was agonizing. The pain was endless. Void sharks, no, shadow sharks, the black monsters that had escaped his control and swarmed him. They were tearing the Nightmare Apostle's body apart with black steam blazing from their entire bodies. It was a truly gruesome sight, and at the same time, a familiar situation to him. The battlefield of outer space, the shadow monarch they witnessed from afar, that terrifying king of darkness, did the same thing to them. Kill and steal. His power, the worst and strongest in the war, was now being displayed by his son. It was despairing. Chomp, chomp, crack, how, in my domain, gak. Was this a dream? No, it's too painful for that. But that's why it was even more unbelievable. It literally felt like a nightmare. No matter how much his limbs were bitten and chewed by the shadow shark's vicious fangs, his body regenerated over and over. That was the power he obtained by becoming the Nightmare Apostle. The ability to turn everything that happened to him into nothing, like a dream that disappears when you wake up. But he couldn't avoid the physical pain, and it was endlessly repeating. It was as if his great power was pushing him into the abyss of nightmares, endlessly. But what was more confusing to the Nightmare Apostle than the pain were his thoughts. Because of what Sung Suho said. Is this really the world ruled by the Shadow Monarch? That can't be. He couldn't believe it. According to his research, the Sea of the Afterlife was a dimension that couldn't be ruled by anyone. There was no value in it, and no race lived there to rule. It was simply a trash can where scraps that had lost everything floated around. There can't be a master ruling over a landfill. The Nightmare Apostle groaned with a dumbfounded expression. Even as he screamed, blood splattered from his mouth, but it quickly healed, and then he vomited blood again. Suho shrugged at that. My family has always been good at recycling. Hearing that, he finally realized something. This place didn't belong to anyone, but he finally understood where all those soldiers the Shadow Monarch commanded came from. All the souls drifting in the Sea of the Afterlife were materials for shadow soldiers. If his level was high enough, he could simply pick them up and resurrect them. This place was like a flea market. My mistake. The Nightmare Apostle sighed. To think this was his harvest, something so obvious once you knew. Why did he realize this important fact only now? I was ignorant. He honestly admitted his fault. Admitting ignorance was the foundation of development, and that was evolution. But even as his body was repeatedly destroyed by the shark's teeth and regenerated, the Nightmare Apostle's eyes didn't show any sign of giving up. I won't die here. At that moment, the Nightmare Apostle ripped his shark-bitten body apart himself and desperately leaped forward. The world tree was at the end of that path. The shadow sharks fiercely chased after him and tore at his body, but he didn't stop. Evolution is my mission and reason for existence. Pain or whatever. I can see the goal. I can't give up now. Evolution always came with pain. Circa. Suho gently put down Circa, who was in his arms, and looked into her eyes. Now it's your turn. Walk. You don't need to step on the ice anymore. What? The elven footsteps. If I can do it, you can too. She followed Suho's gaze and looked down at his feet on the Black Sea, and her eyes changed. It was none other than Circa herself who taught Suho the elven footsteps skill. There were no unexpected events. Circa could walk on the Sea of the Afterlife, even without the ice path the Frost Monarch created. Suho lightly patted her back and cheered. See? Go ahead. Go to the world tree and accept the primordial darkness. What about you? I'll follow you soon. I'll take care of him first. Suho turned his head and glared at the Nightmare Apostle. Go ahead. I'll catch up soon. Suho's eyes as he looked at the Nightmare Apostle were cold. Beru, let's go. At that moment, Suho and Beru's figures shot towards the Nightmare Apostle like black streaks of light. You can't kill me. I know, but I can stop you. Suho's sword mercilessly slashed at the Nightmare Apostle's entire body. You'll stay here and suffer. Forever. Why? Don't you like nightmares? The Nightmare Apostle flinched at Suho's persistent and vicious attacks. Meanwhile, Circa was already running far away, across the black surface. This was no longer her nightmare. The king of the snowfolk, the frost monarch, urges the successor to hurry. Silad's voice reached Circa's ears. She ran without rest, following that voice. She didn't need the ice pillar or the ice path anymore. With the elven footsteps, she lightly stepped on the pitch-black sea of the afterlife and desperately ran towards the world tree. The sounds of battle between Suho and the Nightmare Apostle gradually faded behind her. So did the Nightmare Apostle's screams. Almost there. The silhouette of the world tree, faintly visible in Circa's vision, grew larger and larger. It appeared majestically at the edge of the dimension. Silad's voice also became clearer, and when she finally arrived, she saw that the shadow wasn't the world tree. No, to be exact, it was something massive wrapped around the world tree. Circa instinctively leaped to the side, and a giant serpent's tail struck down on the spot where she was standing. Nidhegg, the serpent that gnaws at the roots of the world tree. A giant serpent coiling around the roots of the world tree. A being that sucked the nutrients of the world tree and never left. It was blocking Circa's path. Nidhogg. Circa's eyes flashed with determination. She already knew about Nidhogg from Suho, but seeing it in person, it was incredibly huge. The giant serpent coiled around the world tree's roots, glared at Circa, and roared. Black poison flowed from its mouth. Hurry, you have to find the frost monarch among its heads. Beru, who had suddenly appeared beside Circa, urged her on. Suho, who was fighting the Nightmare Apostle, had sent only Beru here. Devour it before it devours you. That's all you have to do. How can I eat something like that? Circa screamed at Beru's words. She wasn't exaggerating. What could she possibly do against such an absurd creature? But despite her words, Circa's body was already moving. Now that the monarch's power was so close, she couldn't back down. Let's go! Circa charged towards Nidhogg, using the pinnacle of the elven footsteps. Her feet stepped on the world tree's massive trunk, and she leaped vertically. Nidhogg's heads blocked her path. A tremendous pressure engulfed her. Circa's breath hitched from the overwhelming presence, as if a giant mountain range was moving. One of Nidhogg's giant heads struck down like lightning. She barely dodged it by twisting her body, but still was swept away by the shock wave. The thrown Circa let out a low groan. A pain that felt like her entire body was being twisted swept over her. Get a hold of yourself. This is only the beginning, Beru warned. The giant serpent's body coiled around the world tree. Circa barely managed to get up, looking at that. There it is. She found it. One of the 6 heads was glowing ominously, different from the others. She instinctively knew that the power she was destined to inherit was within. Nidhogg's attacks rained down, and the bark exploded. The shock waves were strong enough to shake the world tree. But Circa used those fragments as a foothold and jumped even higher. She climbed on top of Nidhogg's giant body and began to run across it. It was difficult. This wasn't the ice path created for her. It was the path on a giant serpent trying to shake her off. Nidhogg's body thrashed, and its maws opened in all directions, trying to devour Circa. The attack was so overwhelming, it felt like the entire dimension was trying to swallow her whole. Not yet, but Circa didn't give up. She continued running across Nidhogg's writhing scales. The poison raining down from above gradually contaminated her body. It was so potent that it felt like the skin was melting, not just being contaminated. But Circa kept running, forward, along the serpent's path, towards the maw that was wide open towards her. Have you finally arrived? And at that moment, she felt a small hand gently patting her head. It was Beru, and good work. Beru's body suddenly began to swell rapidly. and the tremendous power contained within spread in all directions. The enlarged ant grinned and held up Nidhogg's maw, which was about to chomp down on Circa. Looking down at her, who had come this far on her own, Beru said, "I'll help you from now on." Chapter 316, Chapter 314, Grah! Beru's hand blocked Nidhogg's mouth, and a fearsome roar erupted from within. Crack! The hand, which was supporting the creature's palate, was pressed down by an overwhelming force. The oppressive feeling that at any moment, those vicious fangs would instantly chomp down and grind them to bits overwhelmed Circa. But Beru, resisting that, was smiling. No, grinning broadly. And as he stood on two legs, supporting the creature's maw, he put more force into the hand that was propping up the palate. Crack! Nidhogg's giant mouth was forced open, and a look of bewilderment appeared in its eyes. "I'll buy you some time. Go in." Circa's eyes widened. Even as Beru was supporting the giant serpent's maw, his gaze was still fixed on her. "Go in and claim it, with your own hands." At Beru's words, Circa immediately leaped into Nidhogg's mouth, which was being forcibly held open without a shred of hesitation. It was an important moment. She had already reached her destination and found the head where the power of the Frost Monarch was hidden among Nidhogg's 6 heads. All that remained was for Circa to enter those deep, dark jaws and find the primordial darkness. The final stage of the succession ceremony, and until then, buying time was Beru's role. Rumble. Nidhogg's giant body coiled around the world tree, and as he supported himself like that, Nidhogg's 5 other maws opened towards Beru and launched a fierce attack. Grah! Gah! It felt like the whole world was collapsing and rushing towards Beru to devour him, an overwhelming pressure, similar to a natural disaster. But even in the midst of all that, he didn't retreat an inch. Rather, he was overjoyed. A grin spread on his face. It's been a while. Indeed, it truly had been a long time, hadn't it? Since he had a battle where he could unleash all his power without holding back. Beru had been gathering strength by devouring numerous magic stones and magic crystals, and he had been saving that power. The reason was, of course, to avoid hindering Suho's growth. Although he wanted to step forward and help him, that would ultimately take away Suho's experience points. But not now. Suho was fighting the Nightmare Apostle far away, and helping Circa here had nothing to do with Suho's leveling up. Moreover, the most important thing was that this place was a nightmare, thanks to the Nightmare Apostle. Because of the nightmare realm he created, Beru could unleash all the power he had gathered here and return to his original state, like a dream that disappears when you wake up. Just like the Nightmare Apostle's body returning to normal, no matter how much it was wounded by Suho's attacks. Therefore, Beru could release all the power he had saved up. Boom! Black steam erupted from his body. It blazed like an active volcano, and finally, it exploded. Beru swelled up even more against Nidhogg, who was attacking from all directions. Black wings spread from his back. That form was the same as the disaster-class magical beast that once devastated Jeju Island. The giant ant and the 6-headed serpent clashed fiercely. Boom! The giant fist struck the face of Nidhogg that was charging from the side. With a bomb-like explosion, the hideous maw was crushed and bounced back. At the same time, another head from the opposite side spat poison at Beru, who, while still supporting the jaws that Circa entered with one hand, viciously ripped out one of Nidhogg's fangs with the other. Crack! A groan could be heard from Nidhogg's head that had its fang pulled out. Beru didn't care and threw the fang, piercing the eye of the one that was spitting poison. The scream was delicious. Beru smacked his lips. He wanted to devour Nidhogg. He wondered what its flesh would taste like. But unfortunately, he didn't have the time for that now. The head that had been spitting poison was now one-eyed and even more enraged, attacking fiercely. That's what he wanted. Bring it on. I'm in. Invincible today. Boom. The world tree shook. The dimension itself seemed to tremble from the battle between the two giant beings. Circa gritted her teeth as she felt the tremors. Even though she couldn't see, she could tell that an incredible battle was raging outside. The surrounding mana vividly conveyed that fact. Crack! Crunch! Beru's claws pierced Nidhogg's scales and tore at the wound, but the injury regenerated in an instant. Similarly, Nidhogg's fangs shattered Beru's carapace. but that also recovered instantly with black steam. It's no use. Do you know how many magic crystals the little monarch got me? At the same time, even fiercer black steam exploded from his entire body, just like when he dominated the battlefield alongside the Shadow Monarch. But Beru knew himself. It's still not enough. He was thirsty. His power was still lacking. He wasn't at this level when he fought alongside his master. Skill. Devour, Beru, the marshal who led the charge on the front lines of the Shadow Legion, slaughtering and devouring enemies, had the ability to grow stronger the more he consumed his foes, and this was his unique talent, different from the other marshals. If Igris and Belion were combat weapons that gradually grew stronger through numerous battles, Beru was a strategic weapon who underwent a unique evolution, absorbing a portion of the memories and abilities of the enemies he devoured. In a way, he was a being that fit the description of evolution even better than the apostle of evolution. However, to unleash all that power, the endless mana of the Shadow Monarch Sung Jinwoo was essential. So a battle like this, where he had to rely solely on brute force, only made Beru feel frustrated, as if he was fighting with heavy shackles on his limbs. But something could be done about that. I'll borrow your power for a moment. Beru's gaze suddenly met the Nightmare Apostle's, who was fighting Suho far away. The Nightmare Apostle felt a sense of foreboding. Thud! Thud! Beru's body suddenly began to grow larger. Crack! The giant ant's hand grabbed the maw that Circa entered. No way. The Nightmare Apostle was aghast. Beru's size was now equal to Nidhogg, but he could immediately recognize the origin of that power. How did you get my nightmare power? Beru just smiled at his shocked question. The sight of him mercilessly striking Nidhogg's heads with his giant fists was truly spectacular. The two giant monsters, now equal in size, wrestling with each other, filled the battlefield with brutality. It was impossible to approach them without losing one's life. And Suho, who was attacking him from the front, answered the question the Nightmare Apostle had. Don't be surprised. Beru devoured your brain and absorbed all the memories of your research. What? The Nightmare Apostle was shocked and turned to look at Suho. The repeated pain didn't matter anymore. The fact that all his research records were stolen was a blow that shook his very soul. Boom! The black steam erupting from Beru's body was a bit different now. That giant form was an illusion mixed with the power of nightmares. But at the same time, it was a nightmare with a physical form. At this moment, Beru had literally become Nidhogg's nightmare. Grah! Nidhogg's 6 heads, which had been attacking fiercely, were thrown into confusion. Beru's form was starting to look bigger and bigger, as if it was about to swallow the entire dimension. His actual size hadn't increased. It was an illusion created with the power of nightmares. But the pressure was real. At least in Nidhogg's eyes, Beru's form was now several times larger than himself. Groan. The giant serpent faltered for the first time. Even though he knew it was an illusion, he couldn't help but instinctively cower. How dare you steal the evolution I perfected? The Nightmare Apostle, watching from afar, gritted his teeth. Even as he was fighting Suho, seeing his power being used by Beru enraged him. But there was nothing he could do. My power. While he was being torn to shreds by Suho and the Shadow Sharks. There was nothing he could do here. All he was able to do was to watch Beru's overwhelming battle from afar, frustrated and resentful. Grah! Beru's giant illusion coiled tightly around Nidhogg's body. It was a hallucination made of nightmares, but the pressure felt true. Nidhogg's 6 heads thrashed around in confusion. He couldn't tell what was real and what was not. And as a result, ding, you have completed the quest. Finally, welcome news arrived before Suho. Quest, request of the Frost Monarch. Make the descendant of Siled, the Ice Elf Circa, the next monarch. Circa's vessel is still too weak to contain the primordial darkness. Protect Circa and help her grow until she can inherit the primordial darkness. The quest that Siled had given him was now complete. That meant, groan, Nidhogg's head, which Circa had entered, burst like a balloon. Boom! And the form of Circa was revealed from within. She was floating in the air with her eyes closed, enveloped in black fog. The Nightmare Apostle desperately mustered his last strength. Even though Suho's sword was piercing his body, he couldn't let the primordial darkness be stolen right before his eyes. Circa, who was closing her eyes and accepting the primordial darkness, suddenly saw her vision turn white, and a terrible sight unfolded. In that illusion, the forms of her fellow ice elves freezing to death in the blizzard appeared before Circa's eyes. The white pale corpses lined up before her, the power of the frost monarch. It was a disaster that tormented the ice elves more than anyone. The nightmare whispered, "Aren't you scared? Of that terrible power? The power that drove your people to death?" The whispers of the nightmare apostle dug into Circa's ears. "But you're wrong." Circa was smiling. "I'm not afraid of this nightmare." Circa spread her arms wide and accepted the primordial darkness with her entire body. We were born from nightmares. Flash! Finally, Circa's closed eyes opened. "We are the ice elves, born in the harsh cold. And I," her eyes were filled with the primordial darkness, "am the king of the ice elves, Circa." And at those words, Silad, who was waiting for her at the end of the darkness, smiled with satisfaction. The king of the snowfolk, the frost monarch, passes on his darkness to his successor. Ding! At that moment, the quest reward arrived for Suho, who had fulfilled Silad's request. The winter of frost descends upon the world tree. Crack! Suddenly, the world tree began to freeze from its roots. Circa smiled at Suho from the center of that. "Now I'll be the nightmare of the world tree." Saying that it was the world tree's turn to experience the nightmare they had suffered, Circa just smiled. With a pure and innocent expression. The king of the snowfolk, the nightmare monarch Circa, is born. Just like that, Circa returned as the true nightmare of the world tree. Chapter 317, Chapter 315. An unexpected winter came to the sea of the afterlife. White frost began to form on the bark of the world tree from the harsh blizzard raging around it, and that coldness spread to the roots. White ice began to spread in all directions on the surface of the black water of the distant abyss. In that form, it infinitely spread out like a spider web. No, like countless snowflakes. The ice patterns gradually became more and more complex, and eventually, a giant crystal grew on the surface, blooming into an ice flower. The geometric patterns drawn by the white frost shone in different forms every moment, moving and dancing as if they were alive. Like a kaleidoscope. It was a truly spectacular sight. The white world spreading out, centered around the world tree. The ice garden endlessly expanding. True winter had finally come to the Sea of Death. Under the blessing of the newly born king of the snowfolk, the nightmare monarch Circa. "You too, try to endure it." Circa spoke to the world tree. "The winter we've suffered," and in that form, the image of Silad suddenly overlapped with hers. Indeed, the previous frost monarch was recalling a very old memory through Circa's eyes. His fellow elves fleeing the cold, the corpses of those devoured and killed by the rampaging Elvenwood. And the form of Elvenwood itself, eventually freezing to death, unable to withstand the winter. Suddenly, he wondered, how long would it last? Could the world tree really withstand this harsh winter? What if the world tree froze like Elvenwood? What would happen to the sea of the afterlife? What then? But Silad already knew the answer. Spring will come. Silad's voice suddenly echoed. The world tree had already been dead for a long time. He didn't know if it was because of Nidhegg, who was gnawing at its roots, or because the absolute being who planted it here had died. But he knew one thing for sure. When spring comes, new life sprouts. Knowing that, this harsh cold wind was no longer a nightmare. When this harsh winter passed, this place too would groan. Yeah. Suddenly, Nidhogg thrashed violently and desperately escaped from Beru's grasp. It began to climb up the world tree to escape the cold. He smacked his lips and watched the creature's rapidly retreating form. Beru, whose body had been enlarged by the power of the apostle, was gradually shrinking, the nightmare's power weakening. The nightmare sanctuary is collapsing. Debuff, nightmare is dispersing. Crack! Suddenly, the nightmare realm that had dominated the surroundings began to crumble like a sandcastle. No, the nightmare apostle screamed. His plan had failed. He was confident that he had considered every possible scenario, but it had been easily thwarted by a single, unexpected variable. I simply lacked information. He gritted his teeth and glared at Suho with a venomous expression. If I had more time, if I had researched you a little more. Suho stopped the onslaught and shrugged at that. There was no reason to attack him anymore. As the surrounding nightmares crumbled, The Nightmare Apostle's form, which had taken Circa's appearance and transformed into a dark elf, was also scattering. Suho smirked at his frustration and spoke, "Why? Don't you like evolution? Sometimes, failure is also a stepping stone for growth." The Nightmare Apostle, who was about to retort, paused and closed his mouth. Then he finally lowered his head and muttered weakly, "Is this also part of the process of evolution?" There was no longer any anger or resistance in his voice. His eyes, now calm, looked at the surrounding scenery. That makes sense. Circa's harsh winter was encroaching upon his nightmare from all directions. Habits were truly terrifying. Even as he was being helplessly defeated and dying, his mind was habitually going over his past research. Evolution. What was the evolution he had been so desperately researching? And, facing death, he finally came to see it from a completely different perspective. Well, sometimes the evolution of the world takes precedence over the evolution of the individual, especially for a world like this, a world that lost its god and is dying. Don't just mumble to yourself and say it in a way I can understand. I'm basically saying I lost. A smile had formed on the Nightmare Apostle's face. It was an expression that seemed somewhat disappointed, but at the same time, relieved. Seriously, how did this happen? For me to become fertilizer for evolution. Whoosh. With those words, his body completely crumbled. Like a dream that disappears when you wake up, he scattered into dust. Ding! You have defeated the Nightmare Apostle. And as if on cue, system messages appeared before Suho. Level up! Level up! Level up! Beru's hand suddenly grabbed the scattering remains of the Nightmare Apostle from the air, and he smacked his lips, chuckling. It would be a waste to lose this power. Beru had already devoured the Nightmare Apostle's brain and consumed a portion of his memories, so he could tell. The moment they left this place, he wouldn't be able to use the power of nightmares anymore. He didn't care about that intangible skill. Although it was effective even against Nidhogg, it was ultimately a nameless power that was only useful for stalling. But there was something else. All the research records of the Nightmare Apostle still remained within Beru, so he could use his unfinished studies to do this. Crack! Suddenly, the last remnants of the Nightmare Apostle began to gather in Beru's hand. The traces of his enlightenment, research, and experiments were merging into one. Crack! 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 Smaller and denser. Beru used his devour ability to compress all that energy. Before this nightmare ended, he scraped together its remaining traces. Finally, a small crystal formed on Beru's palm. It was shining pink, a substance much purer and denser than star pieces. Little monarch. Beru respectfully offered it to Suho. I present to you the crystal containing all the research and enlightenment of the Nightmare Apostle. Ding! Obtained item, Seed of Evolution. Seed? Suho received the special seed that Beru extracted from the Nightmare Apostle. It was an unexpected reward, but he didn't have the time to examine it because the succession ceremony was finally over. Just like that, as time began to flow again, Suho and Beru were ejected from Circa's dream. At that last moment, Suho saw the world tree being covered in frost, and he smiled. I guess I can use that. Flash! When he opened his eyes again, Suho and Beru were standing on a snow-covered field. They had returned to reality, and at the same time, all the battles that were raging in this land ended. The villains who were possessed by the outer gods, the power of nightmares that sprouted from their blood, and even the harsh winter that swept across the snowfield, all of them disappeared in an instant. The hunters of the Korean Association looked around in confusion. What? What just happened? Is it over? Why all of a sudden? Don't let your guard down. But no matter how vigilantly they looked around, nothing else appeared. It felt like they had just woken up from a dream. Among them, only Woo Jinchul instinctively turned his gaze to look for Suho. And there, Suho and Beru were already approaching the pillar where Circa was trapped. The hard ice crumbled, and Circa confidently walked out from within. Her appearance was still that of a small and frail ice elf, but the tremendous darkness contained within. Oh my God! It was enough to shock Woo Jinchul. It was a kind of survival instinct. Woo Jinchul, who had witnessed the monarchs a long time ago, instinctively realized that this small girl had become a monarch. Circa, who had successfully returned with the primordial darkness, smiled brightly at Suho. I've returned. Suho smiled back. Good work. Heh? Suho's large hand gently patted Circa's head, and her eyes curved into crescents. Her long ears, characteristic O.F. ice elves, folded back. But it couldn't end just like this. And Circa, reborn as the king of the snowfolk and the nightmare monarch, sincerely greeted Suho once again, with the utmost respect. Thank you for your help, little monarch. Ding, the king of the snowfolk, the nightmare monarch, pledges allegiance to you. The king of the snowfolk, the nightmare monarch, offers you the nightmare of the world tree. Blessing, nightmare of the world tree. Blessing of the king of the snowfolk, the nightmare monarch. The nightmare monarch Circa pledges allegiance to you. Winter has come to the sea of the afterlife, centered around the world tree. This harsh winter will gradually spread throughout the sea of the afterlife. Effect, nightmare of the world tree. The effect of debuff, death, which occurs in the sea of the afterlife, is weakened. Oh, Suho's eyes widened at the unexpected reward. Debuff, death, which decreased HP in real time when you entered the sea of the afterlife. The restriction caused by it was now being weakened by the cold. It's a bit ironic that the colder the sea of the afterlife gets, the less likely you are to die. That's why it's a nightmare for the world tree. Beru quickly explained. He had gained much more knowledge thanks to the Nightmare Apostle's research. He had evolved to be an even better explanation bug. It seems like debuff, death, exists to protect the world tree, which is somewhere in the sea of the afterlife. To prevent anyone from finding the world tree? That must be it. It's that important. Conversely, it means it's now much easier to find the world tree. Do you really plan to go in yourself? It's still dangerous. Maybe later, when the cold has completely covered the sea of the afterlife. No, it's more meaningful now, and I'm not going in myself. Suho grinned with a satisfied expression. He immediately summoned Harmacon and conveyed the new orders to all the demons in the sea of the afterlife. That news spread like wildfire, eventually reaching the ears of Esil Radiru, the king of demons, who was on the largest ship exploring the sea. Finally, some good news. Esil smirked. I thought I felt a breeze coming from somewhere. The sea of the afterlife was always still and unchanging, except for the attacks of the hungry souls lurking in the abyss. But a faint breeze had been blowing from somewhere since a while ago. It was still too far away to be called a cold wind, but the familiar scent carried on that breeze was important. And Esil knew what that fragrance was, a smell that made her mouth water even from afar. Finally found the direction. Esil pointed towards the source of the wind and ordered all the demons in the sea of the afterlife. Turn the ship. Finally, all the demons' ships began to sail towards the world tree. Chapter 318, Chapter 316, The Death of the Nightmare Apostle. His plans, which he believed to be pretty perfect, crumbled. But his passing, which transpired just like the vanishing of a fleeting dream, left behind a greater legacy than expected. Of course, it was all in Suho's favor. First, it started with the sea of the afterlife. At the beginning, a gentle breeze was the only sign of change, but the effect wasn't insignificant. The atmosphere of death that permeated the sea of the afterlife had remained unchanged since the beginning of time. However, as the cold wave that started from the world tree gradually spread, the stagnant air began to move slowly. Of course, it wasn't a big change. Only the area close to the world tree froze over. Considering the vast scale of the sea of the afterlife, it was just a slight change in temperature of the black seawater. But good. It's getting colder. This is definitely the right direction. Esil smacked her lips and gave orders to the ships the demons were riding on. At the same time, she calmly observed the surroundings. With the direction to the world tree revealed, she realized something. As mentioned earlier, the sea of the afterlife was a stagnant space of death, a garbage dump where the scraps of souls drifted aimlessly. And at the same time, it was a sewer of dimensions, overgrown with weeds that lived by consuming those scraps. Considering the nature of those weeds, eventually all of them would inevitably migrate towards the world tree. That was the result they were seeing now. Slash! Slash! My king! The weeds are increasing in number. Their attacks are endless. Calm down. It's only natural. Esil, the king of demons, the monarch of gluttony, wasn't fazed by the continuous reports, even though the weeds increased exponentially, hindering the demon's fleet as it approached the world tree. Even those who had been bravely exploring the afterlife were visibly flustered. The weeds' attacks, coming from all directions, were overwhelming and terrifying. Slash, crack, crack, crack. The situation became urgent. If they were careless for even a moment, the weeds would gnaw at the bottoms of the ships and pierce holes in them. Black seawater would seep through. Along with it, the weeds would extend their roots into the ship and attack the demons. If they weren't careful, the ship they worked so hard to build would be completely devoured by the black abyss in no time. However, there were those who confronted the invaders. These damn weeds! All right, let's see who wins. The Shadow Dwarves gritted their teeth and rushed to repair the ship with hammers and saws. Eat as much as you want. We'll just repair it faster. It's on. Let's see who's faster. Our victory is certain as long as there are enough materials. A deadly competition started. A fierce contest between the speed at which the weeds damaged the ship and the speed at which the Shadow Dwarves repaired it. Black steam flared from their bodies as they burned with competitive spirit, determined to win the race. The action was extremely intense, but the result was already decided. The closer they got to the World Tree, the more weeds appeared. Although the rate at which the ship was damaged increased, the materials to expand it also became more abundant. As a result, the Shadow Dwarves weren't satisfied with just repairing and expanding the vessel in real time. By a narrow margin, the growth rate was greater. Of course, the balance of this tug-of-war could still be broken if they were careless, but even that only fueled the dwarves' competitive spirit. Kaha! This is great! It's been a while since I've worked this frantically. I would have no regrets even if I died now, although I'm already dead. Oh! The dwarves burst into laughter as they sawed the weeds' remains. Of course, if there were only dwarves here, the result would have been reversed long ago. That's how overwhelming the number of weeds was, but they weren't alone here. So for the dwarves to be able to cuss on their work, all the demons and shadow spiders were engaged in a fierce battle. Even the Elvenwoods, including Alfheim, which had been reduced to keels for all the warships, were extending their roots, directly capturing the weeds and sucking out their life force. Of course, those were just acting on instinct, but as a result, the demon's warship became a self-growing, self-repairing ship, a perfect ghost vessel. One thought possible to exist only in legends or myths. And since those on board were actually demons, it was truly the most fitting ship of death for the sea of the afterlife. At this point, no matter how hard they tried, the weeds couldn't block the path of the demon's fleet crossing the waves in a straight line. Rather, they became stepping stones, making the warship even bigger. And eventually, oh my king! On the Black Sea where they couldn't discern the way forward, they finally found it. I see thin ice in the distance. Somewhere ahead, actual cold could be felt. A giant pillar, its end invisible, was faintly noticeable beyond that. Essel grinned and roared, "Prepare for attack! More of them will come." The edge of winter. The demons finally reached the World Tree. Meanwhile, Suho, who returned to reality, was taking care of other things. Circa, who returned as a monarch, was not an issue. The problem was the legacy left behind by the Nightmare Apostle. Especially among them. No. 47. A woman with white skin and pink hair, her appearance so perfect that it was eerie, was slowly turning to dust before Suho's eyes. "You don't have to look at me like that." Crackle. No, 47, disintegrating into tiny pink cells and scattering like pollen, looked at Suho with calm eyes and said, "I am the ultimate toy that the doctor perfected after 46 experiments. Since my creator, the doctor, has passed away, it is only natural for me to lose the power that sustains me and disappear." There was no tremor in number 47's voice as she slowly disappeared like scattering pollen. When Suho barged into the Apostle of Evolution's lab, number 47 showed panic. But now, facing her own death, she didn't seem to have any lingering attachments. Crackle. "After all, I don't have a soul. I have an ego, but even that is nothing without a foundation. So you're not afraid of death because you don't have a soul? It means that the concept of death doesn't apply to me in the first place." No. 47 calmly answered Suho's question. Her body had already half disappeared. The sight of her scattering in the wind like pollen was ironically beautiful. "So the shadow power won't work on me either. That's something the doctor specifically took care of when creating me. From those words, Suho could tell how wary the Apostle of Evolution was of the shadow power. It was only natural for him to try to avoid the situation where his painstakingly developed creation was stolen as a shadow soldier. So he didn't give No 47 a soul. He created a doll that could exist solely with a body. To put it bluntly, it was the pinnacle of a humanoid AI robot created with the Apostle's power and effort. And Beru, who knew his research records better than anyone, narrowed his eyes and muttered from Suho's shoulder, "My Lige, not only number 47, but all the previous test subjects are disintegrating, having lost their center." It was as he said. When Suho looked around, the otherworldly weapons held by the villains who came from China were turning to dust and scattering like number 47. The sight resembled pollen spreading in spring. It wasn't just his imagination. Suho turned his gaze back to number 47 and asked Beru, "Beru, tell me, how did he make these guys?" Briefly, Beru answered, recalling the Apostle of Evolution's memories. "Various kinds of magic are mixed, but the base material is basically elvenwood pollen. He made them using the Apostle of Paradise's power? Yes, the Apostle of Evolution had no talent for creation. His research was like gathering various ingredients before him in cooking. Even his ideas didn't have to deviate much from imitating someone. There was no need to ask who he was trying to imitate. Sung Jinwoo. The most astonishing and terrifying being he had ever seen. All the research the Apostle of Evolution conducted must have been to become a being like the Shadow Monarch. Pollen. Suho's gaze followed number 47's cells, scattering everywhere, and he suddenly looked down at the seed of evolution he was holding. Item, seed evolution. Acquisition difficulty. Type, consumable, a seed made by compressing the energy left behind by the Apostle of Evolution. An item that didn't give him any clues even when he looked at its description. Although it was made and handed over to him by Beru, even the Shadow Ant himself didn't know how to use this seed. How should I use this? My apologies. I just gathered the power and compressed it, so I don't know its exact use. But I definitely removed the energy of Itarim, so it won't have any harmful effects on you, my liege. Suho looked away from the seed of evolution and called someone else. Arsha, come out. Buzz. As soon as he finished speaking, small bees gathered from the surroundings. Those insects gathered together and transformed into a small fairy-like figure, bowing deeply. You called? Queen Bee Arsha appeared. Although her main body was still trapped in Suho's shadow dungeon, the worker bees she commanded always swarmed around him. Even without explicit orders, they diligently spread out and searched the surroundings to help Suho. Since her main body was permanently held hostage in his shadow, Arsha was always one step from being annihilated if she didn't remain faithful to Suho. But from the moment Ragnar was born in that world, she had been voluntarily serving as Suho's loyal subject. Do you have any orders for me? See that pollen? Summon more worker bees and gather it all. Suho commanded Arsha, excuse me? Confused by the puzzling order, she turned her head and carefully examined number 47 and the scenery created by the pink cells. Only then, a glint appeared in her eyes, and she nodded. Pollen, I understand. That's easy work for the bees. Buzz. The worker bees began to work. Chapter 319. Chapter 317. Zzz. Following Suho's command, Arsha's worker bees began to move busily. They carefully collected the pink cells scattered by number 47 and the otherworldly weapons, as if gathering pollen. 1 cell per bee. More worker bees will be needed. Gauging the relatively insufficient quantity, Arsha's eyes gleamed. Weeying! At that moment, her influence spread in all directions. The ordinary bees living in North Korea, touched by that energy, began to abandon their own queen and follow Arsha instead, as if possessed. Their ever-increasing numbers flew up all at once, chasing the pink dust. Suho's order to collect all this pollen confused her. However, she wasn't curious about his intentions. The important thing now was that she could finally be useful to Suho. What assistance had Arsha provided him since becoming his subordinate? None. Maybe reconnaissance? The shadow soldiers alone were enough for that. What about thoroughly searching North Korea to track the Elven Woods? Even that ultimately became meaningless. Because the moment the perception-impairing barrier disappeared, the elven woods revealed themselves all over the world. Well, if one wanted to think deeply about it, she had done some minor errands, but that was hardly sufficient. From Arsha's perspective, who had to gain Sung Suho's, the monarch's priest, favor to be recognized as a candidate for the next monarch, she couldn't help but become more and more impatient as days passed. But finally, the opportunity had come. I can't miss this chance. Arsha put all her effort into tracking each and every pink cell. Meanwhile, Suho wasn't just waiting around either. Shadow exchange, poof. The moment Suho suddenly disappeared, association hunters next to him widened their eyes and were flustered. Only Wu Jinchul seemed used to this situation, calmly instructing them to secure the surroundings and take care of the injured. Then he resumed the search for the traces of the cult of the outer gods that he had been conducting here. Flash! Meanwhile, Suho returned to the lab where the doctor, or rather the apostle of evolution, had been hiding. As expected, it's the same here too. Looking around the lab, just as he predicted, the same thing was happening here as well. The pink lumps that the apostle of evolution had left unfinished were disintegrating inside the test tubes. Harmakan, let's take all of these too. Yes, master. These cells were in transparent glass tubes, so there was no need for the worker bees to intervene. They could just move the containers themselves. Harmakan, not satisfied with just faithfully carrying out Suho's order, took every single speck of dust he could find in the lab and brought it into the shadow dungeon. Originally, the demonic spirit race enjoyed this kind of experimentation, and thanks to Beru devouring the Apostle of Evolution's memories, he judged that if the two of them put their heads together, they would be able to make use of the things in this lab, somehow. Then he found it. Master, there's a stone tablet here too. Itarim's stone tablet. Harmakan brought the Itarim's stone tablet he found in the corner of the lab to Suho. They definitely look alike. As expected, apostles seem to be communicating with each other using these stone tablets, right? Not only that, but now I see that they can even connect their locations and teleport. The villains were teleported from China this time. It was certain that they were using the stone tablets like the shadow exchange skill, linking gates to each other. The samples have increased. Does that make it easier to analyze? At Suho's question, Harmakan smiled meaningfully and nodded. Yes, I think we can backtrack now. Oh, to where the other apostles are? That's right. Since they're stone tablets that can communicate with each other, we can invade from this side too. Start right away. Flash! At that command, he immediately wrapped the Itarim stone tablets held in his hands with magic. The complex and ornate-looking magic circle began to dismantle and analyze the stone tablets in earnest. Meanwhile, Harmakan asked Suho about his intentions in collecting the pink cells. But master, what are you aiming for? What do you want me to do with these cells? Suho just smiled and replied, I don't know. Harmakan tilted his head at Suho's meaningful smile. His eyes, gleaming like that of a child who had discovered a new toy, made him somewhat resemble a demonic spirit who enjoyed research and experiments. But there was one thing Harmakan didn't know. Suho had been living with Beru, Igris, Belian, and countless other shadow soldiers since he was a baby, and of course, that included many shadow demonic spirits. Looking back, Suho had been experiencing mysterious phenomena that ordinary children could never even imagine since the moment he was born. He accepted them as if they were natural. As a result, he was able to come up with different ideas than the others. In other words, creativity. This could be considered a result of early education. I don't know what I'll do with these either, but let's just imagine for a moment. The information he had learned so far was floating around in Suho's mind as he smiled brightly. Angels, the ruler's soldiers, are born from the fruits of the world tree. The world tree survives by feeding on the souls of the dead in the sea of the afterlife. Elvenwood survives by feeding on dead elves or other creatures. Like the world tree, Elvenwood is similar to the world tree. The Apostle of Evolution used Elvenwood to give birth to test subjects, although not with fruits, but with pollen. Brainstorming done, the floating puzzles finally formed a single picture in Suho's mind. Beru, you called? You said the Apostle of Evolution's research goal was father, right? Yes, it's truly ridiculous that he had such a grand dream. And no, 47 is a humanoid soldier that he perfected by imitating shadow soldiers. That's right. But if you look at the production principle, isn't it more similar to the process of the ruler soldiers being born than to shadow soldiers? Beru's eyes widened at those words. And he looked through the research records he had devoured one by one, his eyes gleaming. That's definitely true. It was truly a curious thing. Angels born from the fruits of the world tree, test subjects born from the pollen of elvenwood. As the ecology of the world tree and elvenwood were close, there was definitely a similar mechanism between the two. Creation is the mother of imitation. Imitation is the mother of creation. These two phrases were the ones that the Apostle of Evolution pondered the most while reading human books. And the result of the experiment that began with researching elvenwood was the immortal doll, number 47. An immortal doll without a soul. Suho stroked his chin and organized the research results the Apostle of Evolution had left behind. Perhaps this might be possible, a way to utilize the cells. Beru, from now on, you and Harmakan will continue the research that the Apostle of Evolution left behind. Oh, Harmakan's eyes gleamed with an intrigued expression. If you just set the direction of the research, we will somehow succeed in whatever you desire, Master. The purpose of the research. The Apostle of Evolution conducted by killing countless other creatures was his own advancement. But the goal Suho desired was completely different. I don't need a soul or ego. What I need is the shell. Beru and Harmakan tilted their heads at those words. But in the meantime, Arsha faithfully completed Suho's order. Bzzz! I've gathered all the scattered pollen, without missing a single one. I need more. The more ingredients, the better. Arsha's avatar, which appeared before Suho, had a puzzled expression for a moment. There are many elvenwoods in other countries too, right? Ah, you're saying you need all the pollen from all over the world. I understand. Arsha, grasping Suho's intentions, nodded and muttered that she would need many more worker bees. If Suho wished, increasing the number of her subordinates was easy. Rather, it was a good thing for her, fundamentally a queen bee. Originally, a queen was a being that could only be born if there were enough worker bees. I will open a way for worker bees to go to other countries. Harmakan used the shadow soldiers that Suho had already spread all over the world as coordinates and created tiny dimensional rifts. Poof! Crack! Crackle! The smallest gates in the world, just big enough for one or two worker bees to barely pass through, were created on Suho's shadow. And I'll set the coordinates so that they can return to the shadow dungeon. Psst! Just like that, following Suho's command, Arsha's worker bees spread all over the world. No one noticed the tiny insects flying around the fierce battlefields, where countries around the world were putting all their effort into eliminating the giant tree-type magical beast elvenwood that appeared simultaneously everywhere. This was because it was only natural for bees to fly around near trees. The next place Suho headed to wasn't Russia, but Korea. More precisely, the game company where his uncle, Yu Jinho, worked. Solo leveling. Virtual reality. Suho. Yu Jinho raised both hands and expressed his joy at his sudden return from North Korea. Are you hurt anywhere? Is everything all right? Even though he knew Suho had potions, he instinctively checked his condition thoroughly, the very image of a doting father. However, those most shocked by that sight were the ones who had been severely tormented by the meticulous and cold-hearted Yu Jinho. In other words, it was the S-rank hunters gathered here to train in the solo leveling game, and the high-ranking hunters of the large guilds under them. Oh my God. I didn't know Yu Jinho could even smile like that. Scary. The sight of him cherishing someone was truly terrifying to others. But Suho was used to his uncle's behavior, so he calmly brought up the main topic. Uncle. Yu Jinho nodded confidently before he could even finish, his expression dependable. Yes, what do you need? Just say it. Suho's gaze swept the surroundings. Solo leveling. The ambitious project that Ajin Soft, famous for its virtual reality game, focused all its effort on developing. It was the culmination of modern science, developed with the utmost effort for hunters to safely gain real-life experience. Virtual reality capsule. Additionally, this machine was also a life support device for patients with the recently problematic eternal sleep disease. Pointing at those, Suho spoke. I was wondering if we could induce the eternal sleep disease, but in reverse. Huh? Yu Jinho was momentarily bewildered, unable to understand what Suho meant. The lack of the soul, eternal sleep disease. A state where the body was alive, but the soul had departed to the sea of the afterlife. What did it mean to use that in reverse? What do you mean? Yu Jinho's expression turned serious. I was wondering if it would be possible to send hunters' souls to another dimension through those capsules. Whoosh! Just in time, the pollen that Arsha had gathered appeared in Suho's hand, who showed him the pink lump where those cells were gathered. From now on, my soldiers will use these cells to create vessels to contain hunters' souls. It will take time, but we will make as many as possible. Suho's expression also turned more serious than ever. So, Uncle, please make not just a virtual reality game, but a simulator where hunters can go to another dimension and fight. Not only Yu Jinho, but all the people in the virtual reality lab were shocked by those words. Suho continued. From now on, we will personally cross the universe and invade the invaders by putting souls into these fake vessels. It was truly innovative. Suho's suggestion completely changed the solo leveling project, which had been developed as a training game for hunters. It was the beginning of a counterattack. Chapter 320, Chapter 318, I didn't know our son was so talented in art. It was about a decade ago, when Sung Suho was a kindergartner. His father, Sung Jinwoo, chuckled as he looked at Suho's drawings. He could confidently say that there was no other 5-year-old in the world who could draw ants this well. A sketchbook was filled with black crayon scribbles, and among them a drawing of Beru that he worked especially hard on. Should I send him to art school later? Sung Jinwoo, already thinking about his son's future career path, was admiring the sketchbook when he quickly stopped smiling at the sharp gaze he felt from the side. Ahem. Cha-haen couldn't help but chuckle as she saw her husband changing his attitude so quickly. But she soon hardened her expression and spoke in a serious tone. This isn't something to laugh about. Look at the latest drawing. The latest drawing? On the last page of the sketchbook was Suho's completed work, titled Our House. Suho said there's his huge dad in that black land. Does that remind you of anything? Why are you laughing? Ah, no reason. I just remembered something funny. Sung Jinwoo, unable to hold back his laughter as he recalled the sacred statue of the monarch erected in the middle of the world of eternal rest, wiped the tears from his eyes and closed the sketchbook. Actually, wouldn't it be okay to just laugh it off? That thought appeared in Jinwoo's brain. But he couldn't help but change his mind after hearing what Cha-haen said next. She had just returned from a parent-teacher conference with the principal of the kindergarten that Suho attended. We've taken care of many children, but we haven't seen any drawings that express friends and family this way. Do you know why Suho draws these kinds of pictures? She knew. Of course, she knew. The drawings that Suho made would definitely seem problematic in the eyes of ordinary people. A sketchbook that was more than 70% filled with black. A small house. A small, ordinary house drawn on the ground, and the entire page beneath that house filled with black. Drawings of a 5-year-old that seemed emotionally troubled were piled up on the desk. But this was actually a perfectly normal illustration. Nevertheless, she couldn't honestly tell her about the Shadow Army. Suho would only be seen as even stranger in this peaceful world if she did. The best his mother could do was to shake her head at the principal's gaze, who was cautiously observing her with a serious expression. I see. The principal just sighed at that reaction. When she first saw these drawings, she wondered if Suho was being abused at home, but she couldn't find any signs of that from the always cheerful boy. And besides, wasn't the woman before her Cha-haen? Suho's mother was a global star, loved and praised by the entire nation. Furthermore, his father was a police officer. There couldn't be a more perfect family in terms of wealth, honor, and morality. So after having several conversations with Suho's mother, the principal convinced herself and came to a reasonable conclusion. Perhaps Suho has an extraordinary talent in art. Yes, that must be it. It wasn't common, but it did happen sometimes, for young children to paint the world as they saw it. Thanks to that conclusion, the whole situation ended as a minor event, but Suho's parents had learned something. It seems our Suho has a talent for art. Actually, what was talent anyway? The fact that a 5-year-old drew enough pictures to fill his sketchbook was already a dedication uncommon among other children. And, as if to prove that, he actually grew up and got accepted into the prestigious Hankook University's art department. Since he got accepted, Suho's skills developed in a positive direction. However, even the kindergarten principal, who first discovered his talent, wouldn't ever have imagined what kind of painting Suho would draw when he grew up. She wouldn't ever consider the possibility that the picture he would meant it would grow so large it would turn the entire universe upside down, causing a revolution of some sort. We have enough materials. At this moment, a truly grand drawing was being sketched in Suho's mind. Paint, brushes, canvas. He had gathered enough materials, so now it was up to him to decide what kind of picture to paint, how to paint it, and for what purpose. I heard from Harmacon that the virtual reality games are actually magical devices utilizing instance dungeons. Yes, I have never dreamed that my brother would intervene in the development stage. Of course, it was only in the Mindspace implementation platform, and the rest of the technical parts were indeed created by Yu Jinho himself with the help of his employees. But the most crucial step, when they were struggling to implement realistic virtual reality, they unknowingly received Sung Jinwoo's assistance in solving that problem. He realized that fact much later. In a way, this truth could be a bit disappointing to Yu Jinho. His masterpiece, which he thought he created with his own effort, was actually only possible thanks to someone's intervention. But as Harmacon personally used magic and thoroughly analyzed Yu Jinho's virtual reality capsule, he came to a conclusion. Well, not bad. You would have eventually succeeded in implementing virtual reality even without our king's help. Of course, it would have taken decades longer. But Harmacon wasn't from a race that would comfort or empathize anyone. First of all, Yu Jinho himself didn't feel upset when he found out about Sung Jinwoo's intervention. Rather, he shed tears of joy, saying, "As expected of my brother." So Harmacon only said this because he was genuinely impressed by human technology. In the eyes of the demonic spirits, humans were an extremely weak race. But despite that, he couldn't help but acknowledge that the ever-evolving technology of mankind was the best in all dimensions. A race that endlessly evolved because they were born weak, that was humanity. How else could the great and glorious King of Darkness, the Shadow Monarch, be born from among them? That's why Harmacon became certain once again after analyzing the capsule that Yu Jinho developed. Highly advanced science is not much different from magic. That someday, humans would be able to understand dimensional coordinates with pure scientific power and freely cross dimensional gaps. That's why he was sure. You already had all the necessary ingredients. The grace that the Shadow Monarch bestowed upon you only shortened the completion time a little. Of course, it would have taken decades longer without that, but with Yu Jinho's persistence and effort, he would have eventually achieved it. Knowing all that, Sung Jinwoo simply offered a little help. The results of that analysis were shared in their entirety with Suho through Harmacon. So now he began to paint, using all the materials gathered before him, solely to help his father. Out-of-body experience, lucid dream. As Harmacon analyzed, the foundation of the virtual reality game was a magical device that temporarily extracted the soul from a living body and allowed it to indirectly experience an instance dungeon. And it was much safer than the eternal sleep disease or an out-of-body experience, with the soul's coordinates firmly fixed within the game capsule so that it could return to its body at any time. We'll create an avatar to temporarily hold the soul using these cells, and we'll put people in that avatar and make it have a dream where it goes to another dimension that actually exists, not an instance dungeon. It will be called a virtual reality game. But in reality, they'll be able to become hunters online, not offline, and raid real dungeons. That's certainly possible. No, if it's like this. When Yu Jinho, who was lost in thought after hearing Suho's explanation, opened his eyes again, he was no longer the doting uncle, but the head of Ajin Soft. A burning passion blazed in his eyes as he looked at the lump of pink cells Suho held. With this method, even non-awakened people can participate. That's right. Suho also nodded confidently. The picture he painted was the result of reviewing all the research data left by the Apostle of Evolution, combined with Harmakan's knowledge as a demonic spirit and the memories Beru devoured. And Yujinho's mind, having received all that information, was burning with passion. Not just metaphorically, his brain was literally overheating and spinning. Like when he first developed a virtual reality game with his employees in his younger days. As the picture Suho painted was handed over to him, it became even more concrete and detailed. Because Yujinho was undoubtedly the best game developer in this era. Yujinho, having finished his calculations, smirked. This is exciting. You're saying that everyone can become hunters and fight, not on Earth, but in another dimension? And against the gods of outer universe? But wait a minute. What are you two talking about? Ah! Yujinho, focused on his conversation with Suho, belatedly realized that there were many eyes watching them. His gaze subtly swept around. All the high-ranking hunters' eyes gathered in the virtual reality lab were focused on them. But except for a few who were directly connected to Suho, like Sojiwoo, they all had dumbfounded expressions and couldn't follow their conversation. It was only natural. It was a conversation that only he and Suho understood, but there was no reason to keep it a secret now. Rather, from now on, he would need the active cooperation of all these hunters. The big picture that Suho was painting required a lot of work. Harmakan and Beru would handle the creation of the avatars, and finding the way to the outer god's realm beyond the dimensional gap was a task Suho had to solve. Then what was his job? In the end, it wasn't much different from what he had been doing, games and gathering countless players to enjoy those games. Yujinho, who had already become the best game developer in the world, was now aiming for the best in the universe. But he didn't feel any fear or worry. Rather, he was excited as if he had returned to his youth when he followed Sung Jinwoo into dungeons. Just like back then. He had finally found the only way to directly help his brother who was fighting alone in space. Brother, you raised a good son. Yujinho smiled at Suho's face, which resembled Sung Jinwoo from those days, and turned his head to answer the questions of all the hunters who were focused on him. Although it seemed like they wanted to ask him about everything, he decided to omit the detailed explanations. What was the point of explaining the game development process to the players? The important thing was the core. The game server will be expanded soon. Server expansion? Perhaps because his answer was a bit unfriendly, Yujinho gave a warm smile at the puzzled reactions of all the hunters under the S-rank guildmasters and announced, "In short, our new game will be about the player going out into space and fighting against the outer god's invasion." And at that moment, the official name for that game crystallized in Yujinho's mind, Solo Leveling Ragnarok, an expansion pack for all mankind on Earth, including not only hunters but also non-awakened. From this moment on, we, Ajin Soft, will prepare a large-scale project to turn all of humanity into hunters.